My parents really wanted to move, so I bought a place for them. What do you mean? My husband used our savings to buy an apartment for his parents without talking to me about it. We'll just save up again. Anyway, stop telling me what to do with my money. I felt nothing, no sadness or anger. It was like I fell into a void. And then I slowly held his hands. I met my husband Tom at a college party. He was sitting across from me on the couch and I noticed him looking at me. After a while, we went to a quieter corner outside and started talking. We had a lot in common, and it was fun to chat with him. We exchanged numbers and started dating. 2 years later, when I was 25, he proposed. I always wanted to get married and have a family, so I said yes. We got a small apartment near his parents, and I quit my job to stay home as he asked. Soon after, I got pregnant and had our son Leo. Around that time, my in-laws started inviting us over a lot. They never asked me directly but would tell Tom to ask me. I knew they wanted to see their grandson. They loved Leo and bought him toys. Leo, who was very attached to me, got used to them quickly, but every time I was at their house, I felt uncomfortable. Maria, if you're too busy with housework, you don't need to come over. We're fine with just Tom and Leo. I felt out of place. It seemed like they didn't want me there. Leo was still little and would cry if I wasn't around. I didn't want to leave him alone with my elderly in-laws, so I stayed. Even though they tried to push me out, it felt like they didn't like me, and their behavior toward me got worse. One day, I was cleaning the house when I got a call from Tom. He was panicking because his mom had hit her pinky on the table, and she called an ambulance. He gave me the hospital's name and told me to go immediately. She just bumped her pinky. Why am I the one going? I just did the same thing a few minutes ago. I was about to complain, but he hung up. I reluctantly went to the hospital. When I got there, I saw my mother-in-law sitting in the waiting room, chatting with other elderly people. When I called her, she said, "Oh, I just bumped it a little. Tom is overreacting. Go home and stop slacking off. I stopped what I was doing to come here for you, and now you say I'm slacking off?" I turned to leave. I heard her tell the others, "My daughter-in-law is awful at housework and so lazy. I don't know what to do with her, and she's so rude." I couldn't take it anymore and walked away. That night, I told Tom about it, but he just said, "Whatever, it's fine," and kept drinking beer. His lack of concern made me upset. "How is this fine? You're annoying. Stop complaining, I'm exhausted from work." He got mad, and we stopped talking for about a week. I started to worry that Tom wouldn't give me the money I needed for the next month. He was in charge of our finances, and I usually got a monthly allowance to cover everything. If he didn't give it to me, I wouldn't be able to manage. I was so worried that I apologized to him. He accepted it, and we went back to our usual life like nothing happened. Who knew something bigger was coming? Tom dropped a bomb on me just 3 days after we made up. His mom was having trouble walking, so we were supposed to move in with them. I, of course, refused. I plan to go back to work once Leo starts middle school. I can't keep taking care of her. "Well, then we'll get a divorce. You're a stay-at-home mom, so you won't be able to support Leo. I'll take custody." I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I didn't have a job or the means to support him. Even if I found one, where would I leave Leo? My parents lived with my brother, his wife, and their 5 kids. I couldn't ask them to take on more. So I had no choice but to accept his demand again. We were supposed to break the lease on our apartment and move in with his parents at the end of the month. On moving day, his parents happily welcomed Tom and Leo, but they treated me differently, telling me the house rules and making sure I asked for permission to go out. It didn't feel welcoming at all. Since then, their treatment of me only got worse. One day, I came back from grocery shopping just before noon. I saw pizza boxes on the kitchen counter, and it seemed like they had just finished eating. I clearly told them when I left, "I'll make lunch, so please wait for me." "Oh, Maria, we were craving pizza, so we ordered. We left some for you on the dining table." "Thanks." I went to the dining room and opened the box. There was one piece of pizza. I felt frustrated to be left out again. The piece wasn't even whole, with a chunk missing. It looked like Leo had taken a bite. I didn't even get a full slice. I felt like Leo was mocking me, and my eyes started to tear up. Another time, it started raining while I was out. I'd left our sneakers in the sun, so I rushed back home. When I arrived, I found my mother-in-law had taken Tom and Leo's sneakers inside but left mine in the rain. Tom and my father-in-law acted like they didn't notice. At mealtimes, if I served a big plate to share, they would immediately take everything, leaving me nothing. So I started serving them smaller portions, but they complained it was too little. That's how things went. In the end, I kept my portion on the side and ate it after they were done. I tried so hard to keep my cool, but eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I was about to beg Tom to move out when, "Hey, I bought a new apartment. Let's go see it. You'll love it." I was shocked. We never talked about this, and where did the money come from? He rushed me to go with him. The apartment was a brand new building in the center of town, near a mall, school, and post office. The apartment was huge, bright, and had a great view. It seemed almost perfect. Just as I was about to ask about the important details, he said, "My parents really wanted to live here, so I bought it with the money from selling their house and our savings. Isn't it amazing?" What? What did he just say? He spent all the savings that were meant for Leo's education and our future retirement on this? How was that amazing? How could you be so selfish? Please cancel the contract. I was in complete panic and begged him to cancel. We'll just save again. You don't get to tell me what to do with my money. A housewife has no say. He snapped at me. You told me to quit my job and stay home. The word divorce hit me like a lightning bolt and I ran out of the apartment. When I got home, my father-in-law was watching TV and my mother-in-law was on the phone. I quickly gathered what I needed, packed a bag, and left a note that said, "Let's divorce," with my wedding ring on a desk. I rushed out of the house, holding Leo, who was half asleep. "Let's get a room at a motel for now." We wandered the streets, not knowing what to do next. Then I heard a woman's voice calling my name. "Maria, is that you?" "Oh my God, is it?" I turned around and instantly recognized her. "It's me, Amy. Remember me? It's been so long." She was a friend from high school. We had kept in touch for a while after graduation, but eventually drifted apart. She had divorced her cheating husband and moved back to our hometown last year. I told her about what was going on in my life, including the possibility of divorce. She was smart and said, "I know the best divorce lawyer. I'll give you his contact." The lawyer turned out to be the same guy I had a crush on in high school. I remembered him well. I wanted to give him a birthday gift, but there were already too many decorations and presents around his locker. I tried another locker he used for the tennis club, but it was the same. I even took a bus to his house, but his mailbox was too small, and a barking dog blocked the way to his porch. I didn't have the courage to give it to him directly, so I gave up and went home. A bittersweet memory of my youth. Amy gave me the lawyer's contact details, and I thanked her over and over. When we arrived, I couldn't waste any time, so I went straight to see him. I hadn't booked an appointment in advance, but I needed to do something. A kind middle-aged woman at the front helped me and said I was lucky. There had been a cancellation. She even offered to watch Leo while I met with a lawyer. I waited a bit, and then Adam, Mr. Jackson, came in. He was handsome back then, but he had only gotten more attractive with age. His face was still striking, and his body was well-toned. The way he wore his suit was incredible. Compared to him, Tom looked like a mess. "Thanks for waiting. I'm Adam Jackson. Nice to meet you," he said as he handed me his business card. I did the same, but I noticed my voice was shaking. "I'm sorry for showing up without an appointment," I said, and then explained the reason for my visit. He started asking me questions, but I could barely focus. His looks were distracting, and his voice was like a beautiful tenor. As I listened to him, I couldn't help but imagine him getting better with age, like George Clooney. We were in the office for about an hour and a half. It was the happiest time I had in a long while. I thanked Adam and the woman profusely before leaving. Leo had been good throughout the meeting, and I promised myself I would stay strong for him. While I got temporary custody, Adam continued negotiations with Tom. Of course, Tom wasn't easy to deal with. His rage was clouding his judgment, so we ended up going to trial. "Don't worry, this happens a lot. I've got this," Adam tried to reassure me. He gave me a ride to court on the day of the trial. When we got there, I felt a lump in my throat. I was about to see Tom for the first time since I left. As soon as he saw me enter the room, he yelled at me. "You, what the hell do you think you're doing? Who took care of you all these years? You owe me." He looked like he was about to charge at me, but his lawyer and the security quickly restrained him and dragged him into the hallway. I was terrified. Even though we were divorced, he might try to hurt me. I could hear him screaming, and his lawyer said this could make things worse. The police might get involved. Then it went quiet. We went through the hearing without any more issues. Afterward, Leo and I were offered to stay with Amy's parents. They ran a local diner and hired me as a waitress out of kindness. They also had an unused trailer in their backyard and offered it to us to stay in. One night, I don't know how they found out, but Tom's parents showed up at the house. They tried to cross the yard toward our trailer, but Amy's parents stopped them. "Hey, come out, you coward. Give us Leo," I heard them shouting. Amy signaled me to hide and went outside to deal with them. "If you don't leave right now, we'll call the police," she said as she dialed. They realized she was serious and tried to run away, but Amy's parents held them in place. A police officer arrived within a minute. After hearing both sides, the officer escorted my in-laws back to their car and made sure they left. I frantically apologized to Amy and her parents, then began packing my things, but they stopped me and insisted it was safer to stay with them. "Your divorce drama is quite the spectacle. I'm pumped to help you fight this," Amy joked, though her enthusiasm made me uneasy. Come to think of it, she was a fan of Spanish soap operas. 2 months later, thanks to Adam, I secured great alimony, custody, and child support. I was finally free to move on with my life, able to live without the weight of my past hanging over me. I held Leo tightly in my arms, comforting him, ensuring he knew I would always be by his side. Before leaving Adam's office, I thanked him for everything he'd done, then told him I had known him from high school. He didn't remember me, but was kind enough to say I could always count on him if I needed anything. The incident with my in-laws spread throughout the neighborhood, and soon the neighbors saw Tom as an abusive husband. Embarrassed, Tom and his parents moved to another town. Tom sold the new apartment and gave me half of the profit. He was in debt from the trial and still had to pay me alimony and child support, so he ended up living in a trailer park. I had feared his retaliation, but he wasn't as reckless as I'd thought. He never tried to contact me again. As for my in-laws, they continued to show up at my place even after the police warned them. Eventually, they were arrested. After spending time in jail, they both fell ill and were placed in a facility by Tom. As for me, I still worked at the diner. "Hey Maria, take a break. Let's grab something to eat." "Thanks, yeah, let's eat." I took off my name tag and sat down in a booth. Amy joined me with a cheeky grin on her face. "So how's it going with Adam?" "Going straight to the point, huh?" "Of course, I want all the details," she asked eagerly. Adam had asked me out not long after our last meeting, and we started seeing each other. This weekend, he was meeting Leo officially for the first time. I told Amy about it. "Wow, Leo's finally meeting him. Where are you guys going?" "Who suggested bringing Leo?" she asked excitedly, bombarding me with questions. "Good food, great friends, and a re-encounter with my old crush. Despite all the terrible experiences I had, I'm grateful I found the courage to leave that old life behind. Now I feel like I'm standing at the end of the tunnel, and I know that from now on, I'll be surrounded by good people supporting each other. More than anything, I'm thankful and blessed to be able to stay with Leo. I will live my life on my own terms, and I know I've got a solid support system behind me." I walked into the house after a long day at work, eager to relax, but something didn't feel right. The usual peace I hoped for was missing. As I passed by our small office, there he was, Greg, my husband, sitting at the desk, papers spread out in front of him. And not just any papers, my personal files, bank statements, and journals. The realization hit me like a punch. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of what he was doing. What are you doing, Greg?" I asked, my voice quivering with a mix of anger and disbelief. He looked up slowly, not the least bit apologetic. "Just checking on things, Emma," he replied calmly, his tone patronizing. "With the baby coming, I need to know everything's in order." His nonchalance stirred a deep anger within me, one I had tried to bury for too long. "You have no right to go through my things," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to hold onto whatever shred of respect I had left for him. Greg barely flinched. Instead, he leaned back, crossing his arms as if I were the one overreacting. "Emma, your finances are our finances. If there's a problem, it's my business too. You're about to be a mother, and you're acting like I don't have a right to know. Don't we all need to be responsible here? His words were smooth, like he'd rehearsed them, but the look in his eyes was hard. He was crossing a line he didn't even seem to see. But it wasn't just about today. This was about the months I'd spent watching Greg and his mother, Susan, slowly take control of my life, invading my personal space, my decisions, and even my thoughts. That evening, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, Greg snoring peacefully beside me, while my mind raced, replaying our conversation and every red flag I'd ignored. Since the moment Susan had moved in temporarily to help with the pregnancy, my life had felt like a tightrope walk. And yet, in every decision, Greg sided with her. If I wanted space, she needed to help. If I expressed a preference, I was being difficult. My wants and needs became secondary, and then, it seemed, they became invisible. The next day, I confided in my best friend, Rachel. We met at our usual coffee shop, a place where I felt like I could breathe. Rachel listened carefully, her eyes widening as I poured out everything I'd been holding back. The constant belittling, the passive-aggressive comments from Susan, the feeling of being trapped in my own home. "Emma," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, "you don't have to keep living like this. You're not alone. You deserve so much better than this. You deserve to be happy." Her words struck me, and a knot I hadn't realized was there loosened just a little. Rachel was right. I didn't have to keep suffering quietly, putting up with Greg's coldness and Susan's manipulations. That day, for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life without them. A life where I had control over my choices, where I could raise my child in peace. I realized I needed help. I needed to find a lawyer and get my life back. A few days later, I walked into the office of a family attorney named Ben. The room was warm, filled with light from large windows, and the air felt calm and inviting. Ben looked to be in his mid-40s, with a kind smile and a reassuring presence. I felt a glimmer of hope as I sat across from him and explained my situation. "I feel like I'm constantly being watched," I said, my voice breaking as I described Susan's overbearing presence, Greg's constant siding with her, and how they'd both managed to isolate me from friends and family. "It's like they're trying to erase me." Ben listened intently, nodding with understanding. When I finished, he leaned forward. "Emma, you're very brave for coming here today," he said. "You're taking a necessary step for your well-being and your child's. But be prepared. Standing up to them won't be easy. They'll likely fight this." "I'm ready," I replied, and in that moment, I meant it. I can't keep living like this. In the following weeks, Rachel helped me gather documents and create a plan. Each piece of evidence, every journal entry, every carefully saved message felt like a piece of armor. There were nights when I felt like I couldn't go on, when the weight of my decision threatened to pull me under. But each time, I thought of my future, and I thought of my baby. One night, I sat down with my parents and told them everything. They had sensed something was wrong, but they hadn't known the extent. Their support was unwavering, and the pride in my father's eyes as he told me, "You're stronger than you know, Emma," gave me the resolve I needed. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. I barely slept, my stomach a bundle of nerves as I walked into the courthouse with Rachel and Ben beside me. The waiting area was filled with people, all facing their own battles. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that this was my fight for freedom, for my life back. Greg and Susan were already seated when I entered the courtroom. Greg's face was hard, expressionless, while Susan's gaze was cold and sharp, her eyes calculating. She looked at me as though I were a stranger, but that's exactly what I'd become to her. I wasn't the submissive woman she'd wanted me to be. Ben leaned over and whispered, "Remember, Emma, you're here to tell your story, to claim back what's yours." I took a deep breath, feeling my strength return. I was ready. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the stand, my legs trembling but my mind sharp. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. I married Greg because I loved him, and I thought we could build a life together. But things changed, I said, my voice steady. His mother moved in without asking me. Suddenly, every decision I made seemed to be a problem. I was treated like an outsider in my own home. The words came easier now, and I continued, describing the feeling of being pushed aside, of constantly being watched, of having every choice questioned and overruled. I shared how Susan would criticize every decision I made, how Greg would defend her no matter what, and how I'd been locked out of my own life. The judge listened intently, her gaze focused and empathetic. This isn't just about a house or a marriage, I said, fighting back tears. It's about the right to live freely and to raise my child in a home where I'm respected, where I'm safe. Greg's lawyer presented his side, painting me as overly sensitive, accusing me of trying to separate Greg from his family. They claimed Susan was only trying to help. But when I looked at the judge, I saw that she was listening, really listening to my words. She could see through their words, and that knowledge gave me strength. That night, just as I was beginning to feel some hope, Ben called. "Emma, we need to meet," he said, his voice serious. "Greg and Susan are planning to claim you're emotionally unstable. They're trying to prove you're unfit to be a mother." I felt anger rise within me, hot and unyielding. They're lying. I've done everything to hold this family together, and they're the ones tearing it apart. Ben nodded. "We'll gather more evidence. Their claims are desperate, and the judge will see that. But be prepared. They won't back down easily." Over the next few days, Rachel and I worked late into the night, gathering more proof. I combed through my journals, recounting every hurtful moment, every degrading comment. The memories were painful, but each one steeled my resolve. I would not let them win. Finally, the day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom felt colder, the tension palpable. Greg and Susan sat across from me, their faces hardened. I could feel their resentment, their anger. But I was beyond caring. This was my fight, and I was ready to see it through. As I spoke, I laid bare every moment of manipulation, every instance of feeling like a prisoner in my own home. I described the pain of being isolated, the nights I'd spent crying in silence, feeling like I was disappearing. I could see the judge's expression soften, her brow furrowing as she absorbed my words. Finally, Greg's lawyer tried once more, repeating their claims of my supposed instability. But I saw the judge's expression shift. She wasn't buying it. When the judge delivered her verdict, her voice was calm but firm. "Based on the evidence and testimonies, I find that Emma has endured emotional abuse and manipulation. I am granting her full custody of her child and sole ownership of the home." The relief washed over me, so powerful I thought I might collapse. I'd won. I was free. In the weeks that followed, I moved back into my house, my true home, and started redecorating, reclaiming my space. Every brushstroke of paint, every new piece of furniture felt like a step forward, a small victory in rebuilding my life. And as I stood in what was now my baby's nursery, looking out the window with my hand on my growing belly, I whispered a promise to my child. "You'll grow up in a home filled with love and respect, a home where you can be anything you want to be." I knew my journey wasn't over, but I finally taken control. I was no longer lost. I was finally, truly free.
My mother-in-law said something really hurtful to me while we were at a restaurant. She made it clear she didn't think I belonged there. She even hinted that because I wasn't her blood relative, I didn't matter as much. It made me so mad that I wanted to leave right away. As I got up to go, she stopped me and told me to pay for the meal if I was leaving early. But I wasn't about to pay for someone else's food after being treated like that. I stood my ground and refused. My name is Maya, and I work in an office. My husband Terrell and I are happy together, except for one big problem, his mom. She's always criticizing me and meddling in our lives. Even when I tell Terrell about it, he doesn't see the problem. He thinks she's just being a caring mom, but I know better. As time went on, my mother-in-law's interference in our lives got even worse. She had a key to our house, given to her by my husband, and she just let herself in whenever she pleased. She criticized everything and spread rumors about me to our neighbors. I begged my husband to move us somewhere else, but he didn't seem to care much, too caught up in his work. Then, something changed. He got a big promotion and a raise thanks to a successful project. Seeing this as our chance to make a fresh start, I suggested we start a family. Now that we have more money, maybe it's time to think about having kids, I said, hoping this would make him realize how toxic his mother's behavior was. But he had another idea. He thought if we were going to have children, we should live in a town that's better for them. There aren't many places for kids to go here, like daycare centers or parks. Shouldn't we move somewhere more family-friendly? Finally, he agreed to move, which made me even happier than his promotion did. But that happiness didn't last long. The next day, my mother-in-law showed up unannounced like she always did. I was annoyed, thinking she was going to start criticizing again, but something seemed off this time. I want to celebrate my son's promotion, so I've booked a fancy restaurant. It's really expensive, but it's classy. The food is amazing, and the staff is great. Everyone says good things about it, she told me, inviting me to come along. Sounds nice. Good for you, I said, trying to be polite, even though I was still not happy with her. Well, forget about your schedule. I really want you to come to this restaurant, she insisted. I'll take a look at my schedule, but I'm not sure if I can make it, I said. Don't say that. We really want you there, she insisted, not taking no for an answer. Even though I responded that way, she just smirked and left. It was strange because she had been excluding me before, but now she was inviting me and insisting that she'd wait. Something didn't feel right. When I asked my husband about it later, he said he had already promised his mother that we would go together. She had booked that restaurant specifically for us, and he was excited about it. Don't you feel the same way, Maya? He asked. Sorry, but I'm not excited about it. I'm worried about how much money we'll spend at such an expensive place. I really don't want to go. Just tell them I have something urgent and go enjoy yourself, I replied, feeling uneasy about the situation. Why are you being so negative? Plus, it's not just us going to the restaurant. My brothers are bringing their wives too. It wouldn't look good if you weren't there with the whole family, my husband insisted, excited about going to a fancy restaurant for the first time. Even though I didn't want to go, I felt like I had to. My husband wasn't listening to me anymore. If he trusted my mother-in-law more than me, I decided to secretly record her behavior with a voice recorder I bought online. I had a feeling she would continue her harassment at the celebration. I planned to record it and play it for my husband later. If he still didn't believe me, I was ready to consider divorce. Making that decision made me feel a little better. Still, the day we were supposed to meet my mother-in-law at the restaurant felt really gloomy, and I couldn't stop sighing. I barely knew my husband's brothers, having only met them at the wedding, and I hadn't really talked to their wives beyond saying hello. When we got to the restaurant, the waiter led us to a big room where my mother-in-law, my husband's other brother and his wife, and the third brother and his wife were already sitting. There was one empty seat at the table. My husband looked confused. Did the waiter make a mistake with the seats? He wondered out loud. I'll go ask. Everyone, go ahead and start eating, he said, leaving the room. As soon as he left, my mother-in-law stood up, her face looking mean. There's no seat for you. Why would I invite a stranger who just married my son to a family celebration? She said, sounding really rude. So you have a choice. Prove you really want to be part of this family or leave and never come back. Decide now. I'm leaving, I said right away. My mother-in-law looked surprised for a moment. Did she really think I'd beg her to accept me as family after this? No way. Listen to me carefully. If you foot the entire bill for everyone here, I'll acknowledge you as Terrell's wife. I understand you must be feeling frustrated being treated like an outsider, so pay up and become part of the family, she demanded. I already told you I'm leaving. Why should I cover the expenses for someone else's family gathering? I shot back, turning away from her. My mother-in-law banged her hand on the table and yelled, Can't you see? I'm offering you a chance to be part of the family. Are you really okay with remaining a stranger? Pay up? No, I'm perfectly fine being seen as a stranger. And since I'm not family, I won't be paying for your meal. Goodbye, mother-in-law, I said firmly, and I walked out. She tried to catch up to me, but by the time she reached the entrance of the room, I was already at the exit of the restaurant. When I got home, planning to email my husband about what happened, he surprisingly returned within just 10 minutes. The waiter confirmed that there was no mistake with the reservation, and my mom was causing a scene, he explained. It seemed like my decision to stand up for myself had inspired the wives of my husband's brothers as well. They had been enduring my mother-in-law's mistreatment silently. That seeing me speak up gave them the courage to do the same. In a bold move, both of them left the restaurant, and our husbands, the eldest and third sons, hurriedly followed them. I was prepared for my mother-in-law's backlash, and sure enough, within 3 hours, the phone started ringing nonstop. It was so disruptive that I eventually blocked her calls. However, one call managed to get through from an unknown number. Hello, sorry for calling so late. Is this Maya's mobile phone? The man on the other end introduced himself as a police officer from the nearby police station. He informed me that after everyone left, my mother-in-law tried to eat what she could and then attempted to make me pay the bill. However, the restaurant staff, already unhappy with her behavior earlier, refused her request. They thought I wouldn't come back to pay after leaving upset. Ignoring her calls, my mother-in-law was advised to pay by card. But she didn't have one and didn't bring enough cash to cover everyone's meals. Desperate, she tried reaching out to other family members to help cover the costs, but no one responded. Frustrated and angry, she started yelling and blamed me entirely for the situation. Her anger got worse, and she ended up breaking expensive vases and flower pots in the restaurant. This caused the restaurant to call the police. The officers managed to calm my mother-in-law down, but she refused to admit any fault. The restaurant didn't get paid, and they had a difficult customer on their hands. They asked the police to escort her home. Feeling guilty for ignoring a call from the police, my husband and I reluctantly went back to the restaurant. When we arrived, the police were trying to calm my mother-in-law down. When she saw me, she glared and yelled, "You're useless. This mess happened because you didn't pay the bill. It's only natural to help your mother, isn't it? Pay up now." I was completely shocked when my mother-in-law said something almost threatening, even with the police around. They had already made it clear that if no one took her home, they would either drive her to her in-laws' house in a patrol car or arrest her for leaving without paying. "Please take her away, arrest her, or do whatever you need to do. Just make her take responsibility," I said firmly, my voice firm and determined. My mother-in-law looked shocked at my words. "How could you say something so heartless? I can't believe it. Just pay the bill. It's bad luck to have a family member arrested," she pleaded. "I don't care. I'm not family, and I don't want to be associated with someone who's acting irrationally and causing a disturbance," I replied firmly, trying to leave the restaurant and leave the situation for the police to handle. However, my husband, who had stayed quiet until now, gave me a stern look. "I understand that what happened to Maya was awful, but is it really serious enough to warrant arrest?" he asked, defending his mother. "You're missing the point. She's in trouble with the police because she tried to leave without paying and caused a scene. It has nothing to do with me. Or are you suggesting that I should be responsible for paying for 6 people's meals, even though I didn't eat?" I countered. My husband fell silent, but walked past me towards the police and the restaurant staff. I knew what he was planning to do. Expecting his actions, I called out to him as he walked away. "If you're going to pay for her meal and compensate them, we're getting divorced. Think about that." My husband didn't say anything in response to my words and silently took out his wallet. Feeling hurt and betrayed, I left the restaurant and walked back home along the familiar road. I began packing my essential belongings, getting ready to leave. Just before the day changed, my husband finally returned. "Mom's not getting arrested. It seems she was really in the wrong." but the restaurant said they'd forgive her if I compensated them and promised she'd never come back. I didn't have nearly enough money, so I had my brothers come and help. "Oh, I'm so tired," he explained, his voice sounding exhausted. He kept talking about what happened after I left, seeming irritated by my lack of response. Then he noticed my packed bags and approached me. "Hey, what's with these bags?" he asked, looking confused. "I'm getting ready to leave because we're getting divorced. I told you that if you sided with her, we get divorced. You can't say you didn't hear me, neither can you," I replied firmly. My husband looked down at me, his eyes filled with astonishment. Then he lifted his gaze and began to shout, "What's happening? You've been acting so strange today. I understand that Mom did something terrible, but why do we have to get divorced? I've told you I'm being mistreated, asked, and even with evidence and others backing me up, you still choose your almost arrested mother over me. Isn't it weird that I want to divorce someone who acts like that? I've had enough." He kept saying things, but I didn't really listen. I focused on leaving the house and getting ready for the divorce. The next morning, I went straight to get the divorce papers. When I signed and handed them to my husband, he made a scene about not wanting to divorce. But when I mentioned getting a lawyer involved, he reluctantly signed, and I sent the papers off right away. Finally, I was free to be on my own again. Later on, my husband moved out and went to live with his parents. Turns out, he relied on me a lot for housework, so he couldn't manage it alone. The house soon became a mess. Not liking the untidy environment, he ended the apartment lease and went back to his parents' house. In addition, the eldest and third sons experienced similar outcomes. On the day my husband called them to help with the compensation, they each had arguments with their wives. The wives refused to pay for something that was their mother's fault, but the brothers decided to use their savings to assist their mother without consulting their wives. This led to heated arguments and cooled feelings of love, resulting in discussions of divorce. Both brothers ended up returning to their parents' homes and refusing to do any housework. Ultimately, my mother-in-law and her 3 immature sons also moved back to their parents' house. This situation became a source of gossip among the neighbors, who spread rumors that the wives had abandoned all 3 brothers. Mother-in-law dismissed these rumors, defending her sons and blaming their wives for their troubles. Upon hearing the story, my husband nodded smugly, convinced that divorcing them was the right decision. However, my relationship with the neighbors remained good, and they didn't believe the rumors. They knew about my mother-in-law's unpleasant personality and kept their distance, quietly amused by her antics. As time went on, my mother-in-law gained a reputation as a failed parent who couldn't raise her sons properly. Meanwhile, my ex-husbands earned the label of mama's boys in the neighborhood for siding with their mother instead of standing up for their wives. Despite their persistent attempts to contact me, I changed all my contact details and moved to a new house. They couldn't find us, and they spent their days constantly complaining. Since cutting ties with my mother-in-law and the others, my life has become much more enjoyable. Being free from the stress of dealing with her is a huge relief, and making new friends has been wonderful. During the divorce process, I bonded with the ex-wives of my ex-husband's brothers over our shared frustrations with my mother-in-law. Now, we often go out for meals and enjoy shopping together on weekends. I even find myself grateful to my ex-husband for introducing me to such wonderful friends. In 2 days, we're all planning to visit a new cafe. We can finally do what we want, and it feels incredibly liberating. I want to lead my own life without getting caught up in toxic relationships, and I'm genuinely thankful for the friendships I've found. I believe I would still be feeling lonely if it weren't for them. I'm truly grateful, and I hope these friendships last a lifetime.
Hello, my name is Janice. I find myself isolated, so I'm here to share my story in hopes of finding some understanding. My husband, Raymond, has become someone I hardly recognize. a person whose presence fills me with dread. I often envy couples who are happy, bonded with their soulmates, living the life I once dreamed I'd have with Raymond. But our reality turned out much different than I had hoped. Our marriage began on a strong foundation. Raymond and I both held steady jobs, and our relationship was full of promise. Yet soon after our wedding, everything changed. Without any prior discussion, Raymond quit his job, explaining that his work was causing him depression and burnout. He assured me it would only be a short break, and he'd start searching for a new job soon. In the meantime, supporting us was left entirely to me. I voiced my frustration at being kept in the dark, but Raymond dismissed my concerns. "It's just temporary," he'd say. However, as months went by, nothing improved. I took on multiple jobs just to keep us afloat, while Raymond spent his days playing video games, contributing nothing to the household. Our financial situation deteriorated further until we were struggling just to pay rent. Eventually, we had to ask for help from Raymond's parents, Ethan and Olivia, who were shocked to discover he was unemployed. They revealed a painful truth. This wasn't the first time Raymond had quit a job and relied on others to support him. In the past, his parents had to coerce him into working by threatening to cut him off financially. They had hoped he'd change after meeting me, but it seemed he had simply reverted to old patterns. Ethan and Olivia expressed doubts about Raymond's claims of depression, suspecting he might be manipulating the situation to avoid responsibility. Hearing this was a blow. I had always known Raymond to be hardworking and reliable, but now I saw another side of him. His parents sternly urged him to get a job and stop burdening me, emphasizing that I deserved a partner who would support me, not exploit me. Raymond promised he'd make an effort, but doubt lingered. Hoping things would change, I kept silent about Raymond's continued unemployment, motivated by my love for him and the desire to avoid adding pressure. But he continued to deceive even his parents about having a job, leaving the financial burden squarely on my shoulders. Despite my efforts, our situation only worsened, and Raymond's resentment grew each month when I struggled to make ends meet. He even forbade me from taking any days off, insisting I work constantly. Exhausted and feeling more isolated as he discouraged me from seeing friends, I pushed myself to the brink. Finally, one day, I couldn't go on. I decided to take a day off work to rest. When Raymond noticed I was home, he angrily demanded to know why I wasn't working. I explained that I needed a break, but he exploded, saying I had no right to take time off. I confronted him about the unfairness of it all, that I was the only one working while he did nothing. Unable to handle the situation, I left the house in tears, desperate for a moment of peace. I wandered through the city, just window shopping with the little money I had left. My savings were almost gone, depleted by the year I'd spent supporting us. Returning home that evening, I was met with an unexpected shock. The door was bolted from the inside. When I knocked, Raymond refused to let me in, accusing me of disrespect and saying I needed to learn a lesson. Stunned, I found myself standing outside in the freezing cold, realizing the depth of the situation I was trapped in. For taking one day off work, I had been locked out of my own home by the man I once loved. Raymond's reaction was harsher than I could have ever anticipated. When I returned home, he locked me out as punishment and ignored all my attempts to communicate. "Knock all you want, Janice," he said coldly. "I'm not letting you in. Consider this a lesson." Then he fell silent, leaving me standing outside, shivering in the cold. At first, I waited, hoping he might calm down and let me in, but as the hours dragged on, the painful reality of his abusive behavior became undeniable. Alone and isolated, with friends too far away and family even further, I was left without shelter as the night grew colder. Eventually, I had no choice but to seek help from the only people I thought might understand: Raymond's parents. Still shaking from the cold, I drove to their house. When Ethan, my father-in-law, opened the door, his face shifted quickly from surprise to concern. Through tears, I explained that Raymond had locked me out because I'd taken a single day off from my jobs to recover from exhaustion. I had only gone window shopping, a brief escape from my relentless routine, because I couldn't afford to spend anything. Ethan's expression turned grim. "Janice, why on earth are you working 3 jobs? Raymond told us he was making enough money for both of you. He even mentioned wanting you to quit and relax." Choking back tears, I revealed the truth. Raymond hadn't worked since quitting his job. Instead, he'd been living off my income, pretending to his parents that he was supporting us both. "He hasn't even applied for any jobs," I admitted, "and every time I take a day off, He gets furious because it means less money coming in. As I laid bare the extent of Raymond's lies and manipulation, Ethan and Olivia's shock turned to horror. They were appalled to realize how deeply their son had deceived them, using my loyalty and hard work to maintain his facade. Overwhelmed by pain and embarrassment, I broke down completely, unable to hold back my emotions any longer. Olivia gently comforted me as Ethan's anger mounted. Once I collected myself, Ethan looked at me with a determined resolve. "Janice, you are not alone. We're going to help you through this. It's unfathomable how Raymond has turned out like this, but don't worry, we'll figure something out." Feeling a wave of relief, I admitted, "I don't even want to go back to the same house as him anymore. I don't know what to do next." Ethan nodded firmly. "Don't worry about those details for now. Let's go back to the house together. It's time Raymond realizes the consequences of his actions." When we arrived, Olivia chose to stay back, fearing she might lose her temper if she confronted him. Ethan and I knocked on the door, but Raymond refused to open it, ignoring us both as if we were strangers. Through the closed door, Ethan raised his voice, ready to confront his son's actions once and for all. Raymond's voice was icy as he refused to let me in. "You didn't listen to me about taking a break, so now I'm not listening to you, Janice." His callousness was shocking. "Raymond, this is insane. It was just one day, a break I desperately needed. That doesn't justify locking me out for hours," I pleaded. His response was chilling. "You wanted a break? Fine. Spend the night outside. Take all the time you need." At my breaking point, I demanded he open the door, but Ethan stepped in, delivering a stern ultimatum. "Open the door, Raymond, or I'll break it down myself." The threat of his father's anger seemed to rattle him, and after a pause, Raymond finally unlocked the door. His face betrayed nervousness as he tried a casual greeting. "Hey, Dad." "Janice, it was all just a misunderstanding." Ethan cut him off sharply. "Drop the act, Raymond. Explain yourself. Why did you lock Janice out? And don't forget who owns this house." Caught, Raymond stammered. "It's not what it looks like, Dad. We were just joking around, right, Janice?" He looked at me, desperate for me to play along. I couldn't stay silent. "It's exactly what it looks like, Ethan. Raymond locked me out because I took one day off. I've been working nonstop to support us while he's been living off my earnings and doing nothing." Ethan's face darkened with disappointment as he turned to his son. "Raymond, why are you lying? You left your job without even discussing it with Janice. You promised to work on yourself and contribute to the family. What's going on?" Scrambling for an excuse, Raymond insisted, "Dad, I've been looking for jobs. It's just tough right now. I've sent out a lot of applications but haven't heard back yet." I was done covering for him. "Then show us the applications, Raymond," I challenged. "Let's see the proof if you're telling the truth." Raymond's composure cracked, and he grew defensive. "Why do I need to prove anything? Don't you trust me? I don't have to show you anything." But the truth was clear. Raymond hadn't applied for a single job since leaving his last one, and he had no intention of finding another. He expected to live off my earnings indefinitely. "Ethan, he hasn't sent out any applications," I said firmly. "There was even a vacancy at my office and I suggested he apply." He yelled at me for suggesting it, refusing to make any effort. Ethan's frustration with his son was palpable. "Raymond, your mother and I let you stay here in the hope that you'd turn things around. We believed you were working and contributing. Now it's clear Janice has been supporting you alone. You failed to keep your word, and I can't allow this to continue. You're going to have to leave this house." Raymond's face drained of color. "Dad, no. Please don't do this. Janice, look at what you've caused. Now we're both going to lose our home." But Ethan corrected him sharply. "There's no need to yell at her. Janice will stay here if she wants, or she'll stay in the house alone. You are the one who will be leaving." "This isn't fair," Raymond protested, panicking. "Janice and I are a couple. You can't just separate us. You can't split up a married couple." Ethan's gaze was resolute. "Raymond, your behavior has already done that. It's time for you to face the consequences." "I go where my wife goes, and that's final. If Janice wants to stay married, she has to take me wherever she goes," Raymond protested, desperate and grasping at control. But I was done. "Actually, Raymond, I won't be staying married to you," I said, my voice steady. This decision had been brewing for a long time, and now, at last, I was ready to voice it. "I'll be filing for divorce." Raymond's face fell, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. Years of leaning on others to prop up his lifestyle, shirking responsibility. It had all led to this moment. But rather than accepting it, he tried one last plea. Janice, please, you're not really going to throw away our years together over one mistake, are you? I know I shouldn't have locked you out, but it's too late, Raymond. I replied, exhausted. His actions had consequences, and both his parents and I were united in our resolve. The time had come for him to be accountable, and there was no escaping it now. Look, Janice, it was just one day. We can sort this out, he pleaded, trying to downplay his behavior. Let's talk this through. I'll apply for jobs tomorrow, I swear. We can even start therapy. I shook my head. I know you, Raymond. You won't follow through. You've dismissed every suggestion and shown me nothing but disrespect for the past year. If I give in now, you'll just fall back into the same habits. Turning to his father, Raymond tried to rally support. Dad, please, help me. I'm willing to change, but she won't even give me a chance. Ethan's face was set, resolute. Ray, Janice is making the right decision. You can't keep her here against her will. I don't want her wasting another moment on someone who treats her like this. Then, turning to me, he added, Janice, you're welcome to stay at our place while Raymond moves out. I'll be here while you gather your things. Grateful for the offer, I quickly went upstairs, packed, and returned. Raymond attempted to block my way, but Ethan's stern warning that he'd call the police forced him aside. At Ethan and Olivia's home, Olivia embraced me the moment I walked in. The warmth of her welcome brought tears to my eyes. It had been so long since I felt genuine support. You can stay as long as you need to, Janice, she assured me. In the following days, I made plans carefully. I delayed filing for divorce just a little while longer, hoping that Raymond would find some semblance of self-sufficiency and lessen the chance of needing alimony. I transferred half of our joint account to my own and stopped contributing to it, cutting off the financial support he had come to rely on. Raymond, meanwhile, tried showing up repeatedly at his parents' home, pleading for forgiveness. For once, even Olivia voiced her disappointment openly, criticizing him for his failures. This stand wasn't just about ending our marriage, it was about reclaiming my dignity and setting boundaries Raymond had ignored for far too long. Olivia, with uncharacteristic sternness, chastised Raymond, calling him out for the man he'd become. His tearful apologies were, in a way, a small vindication after the years I'd spent quietly suffering. Over the next month, Raymond was forced to leave his parents' home despite nearly pushing them to call the police to make it happen. He seemed truly baffled that his own family was serious about the eviction. Once he moved out, he began couch surfing, but friends quickly tired of his behavior and excuses. Unable to find stable work due to his reputation and poor work ethic, he eventually secured a low-paying job, just enough to scrape by. As soon as he had settled somewhere, I moved forward with the divorce. It was straightforward. Raymond had no means to hire a lawyer and ultimately resigned himself to it. Thankfully, we had no significant income disparity, so there were no alimony obligations. With that burden lifted, I left one of my jobs, and Ethan and Olivia's generosity allowed me to stay with them as I started rebuilding my savings. Our divorce concluded without drawn-out conflict, partly because neither of us had the resources or the desire to prolong it. Although Raymond apologized repeatedly, I couldn't find it in myself to forgive him. I've since moved into a modest 3-bedroom apartment with a roommate, and I'm beginning to find my footing again. Ethan and Olivia remain a constant source of support, welcoming me into their lives in a way they never had with their own son. For them, too, forgiveness seems out of reach, and it's clear their relationship with Raymond may never recover. This new chapter is one of healing and rediscovery, surrounded by people who truly care for me. For the first time in years, I feel I'm building a life of my own, free from the shadows of the past.
Despite my efforts to be kind, it's disheartening that my sister-in-law spoke with an icy tone, seemingly pushing me away. She remained resolute about claiming my brother's estate and showed no willingness to compromise. I couldn't shake the growing anxiety that enveloped me, casting a shadow on my spirits. I'm Kathy Morgan, a 27-year-old doctor at a university hospital. My brother recently passed away, and today marks his funeral. I find myself at his house, surrounded by people who remember him. Amidst the crowd, Jocelyn, my brother's wife, approached me. "Ah, there you are, Kathy. I'm glad I found you. You've been working hard today. Could we talk over there for a bit?" Jocelyn asked, initiating a conversation. "Yes, Jocelyn." "Sure," I replied, following her. My brother and Jocelyn married 3 years ago and moved into the spacious house where we grew up. The house, meticulously built by our parents, boasted a large garden and other features. Despite our comfortable living arrangements, our family faced challenges. My mother battled a chronic illness, confining her to a hospital since my early childhood. My father's wealth allowed us a comfortable life, but he too succumbed to overwork and joined my mother in death. Left alone in the large house, my brother and I became each other's company. Though he continued living there and flourished in his medical career, I ventured into a life of my own after university. The days leading up to my brother's funeral passed in a blur. As we moved from crowded rooms to quieter hallways, Jocelyn approached me with a grave matter. "Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about, Kathy. It might seem too soon after the funeral, but it's about the inheritance. It's a very important matter." So, I believed it was necessary to have a discussion with you beforehand. However, I found myself bewildered and uneasy as Jocelyn suddenly broached the topic of inheritance. Are you talking about my brother's inheritance?" I asked, seeking clarification. "Yes, that's right. Since we don't have children, the inheritance would be between you and me. Legally, I would get 3/4 and you 1/4, so I would inherit $1 million, Jocelyn explained, her hand covering her mouth, a subtle smile forming. Her revelations didn't stop there. "Oh, and I'll be taking this house too. After all, it's the house where I lived with Henry, and it's filled with our memories as his wife. It's only natural that I inherit the house, right?" She continued. "What I wanted to confirm with you, Kathy, was this. You don't have any objections, do you?" Jocelyn spoke gently and calmly, but there was a lack of the expected sorrow over losing her husband. I had only met Jocelyn at my brother's wedding, making this our second encounter. The indescribable unease I felt during our first meeting returned as I observed her behavior. Back then, I only vaguely understood, but now, after losing my brother, she seemed to be revealing her true nature. Unable to contain my discomfort, I confronted Jocelyn. "Jocelyn, I think this is not the way such important matters should be discussed. Properly, on another day," I asserted. Upon my objection, Jocelyn suddenly turned distant. Her previously calm face tightened, and she looked at me with cold eyes. "Oh, is that so? I'm trying to be nice, and yet you don't understand. What a pity. Well, I have a reliable lawyer. I will make sure to get my share of the inheritance," she said, her tone condescending. "I married Henry because he came from a wealthy family. Why would I marry such a serious and boring man for any other reason? He was truly uninteresting, and I'm genuinely relieved that he's gone from this world." I couldn't believe what Jocelyn was saying. My bad premonition about my sister-in-law was proving true. Did my brother know this side of her? If he did, why did he choose to marry someone so unsuitable for him? Shocked and unable to say anything, I watched as Jocelyn walked away, having said what she wanted and seen my reaction. She probably felt there was no need to stay any longer. I stood there frozen, overwhelmed by complex emotions. Even after returning to my own home, I felt downcast and engulfed in gloom. I had a feeling that more unpleasant things might follow, leaving me restless as these thoughts weighed on me. I found myself reminiscing about the years spent with my brother, feeling as if my heart would burst. Realizing I was now alone, tears involuntarily traced my cheeks. Then, a precious promise I had made with my brother vividly came back to me, as if I were seeing it right in front of my eyes. "Kathy, I decided when I grow up, I'll become a doctor, one good enough to cure Mom's illness. If Big Brother is going to be a doctor, then I'll become one too. We'll study together and find a cure for Mom's illness, right? Let's work hard to become doctors together. Then Mom will surely get better," my brother had declared, his face beaming with happiness. That important promise echoed in my mind after our mother passed away. My brother reaffirmed his resolve to me, saying, "Kathy, I've decided to pursue medicine. There are many people like Mom fighting against diseases. I want to continue researching until we find a treatment for her illness." I shared his sentiment, and together we seriously aimed to become doctors. But now, my brother is gone, and I felt the weight of working hard for both of us. 3 days later, a problem arose. I received a call on my cell phone from the hospital where my brother had worked. The caller, Robert, a subordinate of my brother, apologized for contacting me suddenly and expressed a need to discuss something regarding Henry's wife. Agreeing to meet at the hospital, I waited in the cafeteria for Robert. He soon appeared and got straight to the point after a brief greeting. He explained, "Actually, yesterday, Jocelyn suddenly came to the ward. She brought some sweets, saying my husband received great care here. Then she asked who was the closest to her husband among his colleagues." Describing Henry as kind and dependable, Robert recounted their college days and work experiences. However, Jocelyn's line of questioning seemed to change, as if she was probing for something more. She then asked, "Is there anything my husband was hiding from me?" Instinctively feeling that getting further involved was dangerous, I answered, "Not that I know of." Suddenly, Jocelyn raised her voice, demanding to see where her husband's belongings were. She insisted that she could check them right there, threatening consequences if anything hidden was found. Understanding that Jocelyn was searching for something related to the inheritance, Robert explained that he refused her request, citing the confidential and personal nature of the ward. However, she was later seen wandering around the hospital, probing other staff. I couldn't forgive Jocelyn for barging into my brother's workplace and troubling unrelated people. Deciding it was best to meet with her directly and settle things, I thanked Robert and was about to leave when Jocelyn appeared at the hospital entrance. It seemed like she was planning to probe around the hospital again today. Noticing me, Jocelyn approached and spoke. "Oh, Kathy, what are you doing here? Were you thinking the same thing, perhaps?" I found myself speechless, maintaining a silent demeanor as Jocelyn suddenly burst into laughter. "You're searching too, aren't you? You don't have to hide it. Searching for what? Pretending you don't know Henry's will. He must have thought that if I got it, nothing good would happen. He would have written a will to prevent me from getting the inheritance. If he did write one, he must have given it to someone without hiding it, so I probed you. But it seemed you didn't know," Jocelyn remarked, continuing her tirade despite my silence. "But really, Henry's sister, not knowing anything, he must not have trusted you. You didn't hear anything even when Henry was suffering, did you? Henry didn't rely on you, it seems," she continued, her words hitting me like a barrage. My head spun, and I gradually lost track of what my sister-in-law was saying. "Given your reaction, you really didn't know. About a year ago, I noticed Henry's demeanor was different, so I asked him if something was wrong. Then he said he might be ill with the same disease as your mother. He looked very troubled. His complexion was poor too. Henry was often busy and away, and I was out too, so we didn't see each other much at home. But I noticed something was wrong with him. He must have been suffering mentally. As for me, I married him thinking I never have to worry about money. To be burdened with caring for a chronically ill husband was the last thing I wanted," Jocelyn confidently explained, seemingly unaware of the impact her words had on me. In shock, particularly about Henry suffering from an illness, I stood there stunned. Henry sounded normal during the occasional phone calls. He must have hidden it, not wanting to worry me. But I should have noticed something was wrong. We were the only siblings, and I didn't even know that he was suffering from the same illness as our mother. It was terrifying, especially since I had witnessed our mother suffer from it. While I was lost for words in shock, Jocelyn pressed on. "Are you blaming yourself, Kathy? Honestly, you and your brother are too serious and gloomy. It's sickening. I can't wait to get the inheritance and say goodbye to such dreary people." After her cutting remark, Jocelyn was about to leave when Robert's voice came from behind me. "Excuse me, Is this really a conversation to have in the middle of the hospital? Frankly, it's a disturbance. There are other patients here. If you're done, please leave. Robert, is that you? Were you eavesdropping just now? That's very polite of you. Even if Jocelyn raises her voice, if it's a conversation I don't want to hear, I can't help but overhear it. Jocelyn retorted, turning around with a surprised expression. Ah, Dr. Hansen, weren't you abroad? When did you return? Ah, yes, that's right. I departed from there the day before yesterday and just returned. I was supposed to come back sooner, but my flight was delayed. You're Kathy Morgan, Henry's sister, right? I was just about to go see you. This is perfect timing. Yes, I am Henry's sister. I awkwardly responded to the sudden conversation. Scott, seemingly searching for something, began rummaging through his bag. Where is it? Ah, here it is. Here you go. This is Henry's will. He asked me to give it to you if he died. Sorry, it's late. I'm glad I could finally deliver it, Scott explained, handing me Henry's will enclosed in a brown envelope. I couldn't help but wonder why my brother gave the will to Scott. Why did my brother give this to you, Scott? I know, right? I've been friends with Henry for a long time. You might not remember me, Kathy. Do you recognize this? Scott showed me 3 moles on the back of his right hand. As a child, I saw those moles and said they looked like the Big Dipper. Ah, those moles. Could it be Scotty? Scott used to live nearby and was my brother's best friend. I affectionately called him Scotty, and we often played together. He moved away in high school, and I had completely forgotten about him. Kathy, you remembered. That's great. I reconnected with Henry when I became a doctor. I'd always felt we were similar, but I never imagined we'd end up in the same profession. Henry talked about surprising you with our reunion, but then you found out about his illness. That's when he came to me with a request. He knew I also had a law degree, so I guess that's why he trusted me with his will, Scott explained. Finishing his explanation, Scott turned toward Jocelyn, addressing her with a cold tone. Ah, about the inheritance, you might want to give up. Deceiving a kind-hearted person like Henry might work, but not with me. Unfortunately for you, Henry was aware of your cunning nature. He asked me to watch over his wife in case something happened to him. I've been getting reports from his subordinates about your abnormal behavior, Jocelyn. You were planning to find the will, forge it, and claim the inheritance, weren't you? But if it's too late now, it's in your best interest to back off quietly. Besides, Henry said the right use of the inheritance is something only my sister Kathy would understand. I see, so that's how it is. But to trust a sister who didn't even know about her brother's illness to leave a large sum of money to such a young girl, really, what was he thinking? Who knows what she'll use it for? Jocelyn maintained a defiant attitude, but her face had paled slightly. Looking around, I noticed a crowd had gathered due to the commotion. Among them were young doctors talking to each other. Hey, isn't that the person who wrote that paper and made headlines recently, right? I was thinking the same. That's Kathy Morgan, Henry's sister. I read her paper on rare disease research, and it was truly impressive. I heard she's going to do research abroad soon. The conversation among the young doctors caught the attention of other medical personnel, causing a buzz in the area. More discussions were overheard. Isn't that Henry Morgan's wife causing a scene? She's famous for being seen around Fifth Avenue. Oh, well, that's true. Shopping for luxury brands, going on trips, living a flashy life. I heard she's been supporting a gigolo. Maybe she's after the inheritance. That's possible. I mean, she's been wandering around the hospital, asking questions. It's creepy. Amidst various conversations, I realized I hadn't yet checked the will from my brother. I peered into the brown envelope in my hands. Inside, there was a piece of stationery and a white envelope marked Will. Upon opening it, I saw it began with "To Kathy" in my brother's handwriting. As I read through it, I was so shocked by the contents that I instinctively handed the will to Scotty. Scotty, this is... After reading the will, Scotty smiled quietly and addressed Jocelyn. Jocelyn, it seems you've lost. Henry was planning to end his marriage with you. The letter says so. About the marriage certificate you forced him to write, it seems Henry never submitted it, so he wanted to assure his sister that she could rest easy. You and Henry were effectively in a common law marriage. You never had any right to the inheritance in the first place. That's a lie. There's no way he would do such a thing. Jocelyn's momentum faded, and she began muttering quietly to herself. Kath, can I see that envelope too? May I? Oh, sure. Scotty peered inside the brown envelope and confirmed its contents, then added another blow. Here's the official will as well, Jocelyn. If you want to see for yourself, I won't stop you. Feel free. Jocelyn's face turned ashen, and she looked visibly upset. She seemed at a loss for words, her lips trembling. Continuous criticism of Jocelyn rose from the onlookers. Jocelyn, now without an escape, was frozen in place. Soon, the hospital's administration, alerted by the commotion, had the crowd dispersed to their respective duties. When I looked up again, Jocelyn was gone. After that day, she disappeared from our family home and never reappeared before me. Following my brother's will, I inherited the estate. My research paper on the rare disease that affected my mother and brother received high acclaim, leading me to relocate overseas to continue my research. Part of the inheritance was used as a donation to help those suffering from the rare disease, and the rest was allocated for research funding. Scotty, my brother's best friend, and now more than that, became my life partner. We, as medical colleagues working abroad, are planning to register after our marriage this June. Our hope to free more people from the grip of the disease that afflicted my mother and brother remains unchanged. Together as husband and wife, we aim to continue our research, supporting each other along the way.
I had always thought life would be smooth after getting married. I grew up in a loving but modest home, and despite the loss of my parents in my late teens, I carried their values with me: kindness, humility, and strength. My husband, Ethan, had swept me off my feet during our college years. He was charming, ambitious, and seemingly the perfect partner. At first, his family seemed welcoming enough. His mother, Eleanor, would flash a polite smile, though it never quite reached her eyes. His father, Gerald, was a man of few words, but his disapproving glances often lingered a little too long. Still, I chose to see the best in them because I loved Ethan. We moved into the large family estate soon after our wedding, as per Eleanor's insistence. She claimed it was only temporary until we could save for our own home. It seemed generous at first, but little did I know, I was walking into a gilded cage. Things started subtly, almost imperceptibly. I began to notice how Eleanor would frequently compare me to their family friends' daughters-in-law, who were doctors, lawyers, or heirs to substantial fortunes. You know, Olivia managed to host a charity gala for 300 guests all by herself, Eleanor once said, her tone dripping with feigned admiration. Isn't that impressive, Ethan? I smiled, feeling the sting but brushing it off. That does sound impressive, I replied. She's a natural, Eleanor continued, her gaze cutting into me. Not everyone has the upbringing for it. Ethan didn't defend me, he didn't even notice. It was easier to let these comments slide than to start a conflict. At least, that's what I told myself. Soon, Eleanor began treating me less like a family member and more like staff. She'd leave lists of tasks for me to complete during the day, ironing their clothes, polishing the silverware, and preparing dinner. Initially, I tried to comply, thinking it was a way to earn her approval, but no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. One evening, after spending hours preparing a 3-course meal for the family, Eleanor frowned as she tasted the soup. It's too salty, she declared, pushing the bowl aside. Do it again tomorrow, and please, follow the recipe this time. Ethan said nothing, he didn't even meet my eyes. Ethan's long hours at work left me alone in a house that didn't feel like home. I tried to focus on hobbies, even attempted to make friends in the area, but Eleanor discouraged me. Your place is here, she said one day when I mentioned wanting to join a local art class. There's plenty to keep you busy at home. I realized then that she didn't see me as her son's wife. an equal partner in life. She saw me as an inconvenience, a mistake Ethan had made by marrying beneath their station. But I still held on to hope. I loved Ethan, and I believed he loved me. Surely, he would see how his family was treating me and put a stop to it, wouldn't he? The turning point came during a family dinner. Gerald invited one of his business associates, a powerful and wealthy man named Mr. Hawkins. As we prepared for the evening, Eleanor's instructions became relentless. "Make sure the linens are pressed perfectly," she snapped, "and don't embarrass us in front of Mr. Hawkins. He values class, and you're still learning." Her words stung, but I nodded and set the table with care. When Mr. Hawkins arrived, I was introduced briefly before being relegated to the kitchen. I overheard snippets of their conversation as I served hors d'oeuvres. "She's very lucky to be part of this family," Gerald was saying. "Ethan is too kind. He could have married anyone, but he has such a big heart." The implication was clear. I was a charity case. My face burned with humiliation, but I kept my composure. The night dragged on, and by the end, I was left cleaning up alone. Ethan didn't even offer to help. I finally broke down in the dimly lit kitchen, tears streaming down my face as I scrubbed dishes, wondering how my life had come to this. I didn't know it then, but that dinner would set in motion a series of events that would change everything. The aftermath of the dinner left me emotionally drained. My days were starting to blur together, each one a copy of the last: cleaning, cooking, and being invisible in a house that should have been my sanctuary. But something about that night lingered in the back of my mind, an invisible weight pressing down on me. A week after the dinner, Eleanor summoned me to the living room. She was seated on the ornate couch, a cup of tea in her hand. Gerald stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed, wearing his usual look of quiet disdain. "We'll be hosting Mr. Hawkins again," Eleanor announced. "It's important that we make a good impression this time. Gerald has been working on a significant deal with him, and we can't afford to let anything go wrong." I swallowed hard. "Of course, what do you need from me?" "Everything to be perfect," she replied, her voice cool. "And this time, try not to look so plain. Presentation matters." I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, but nodded. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel the weight of their expectations. I wasn't just a wife in their eyes, I was a pawn in their endless pursuit of social status. The day of the dinner arrived, and I worked tirelessly from dawn. The house gleamed, the table was set with the finest china, and the aroma of roasted lamb filled the air. By the time the guests arrived, I was exhausted, but Eleanor insisted I be presentable. As Mr. Hawkins stepped through the door, his presence seemed to command the room. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried an air of authority. His sharp eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something flicker across his face, a mix of recognition and shock, but just as quickly, it was gone. Dinner began, and I quietly served the courses, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As I placed a dish in front of Mr. Hawkins, he looked up and said, "Thank you, miss. Have we met before?" The question caught me off guard. I stammered, I don't think so." He tilted his head slightly, as though trying to place me. "You look familiar." Eleanor intervened, her tone sharp. "She's Ethan's wife. She tends to stay out of the spotlight." Mr. Hawkins didn't respond but gave me a small, polite nod. The rest of the meal passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, studying me. The next morning, while cleaning up the dining room, I heard a knock at the front door, expecting it to be a delivery. I opened it without much thought. To my surprise, it was Mr. Hawkins. "Good morning," he said, his tone polite but firm. "May I speak with you?" I hesitated. "Of course, should I get Gerald?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I came to see you." He stepped inside, and I led him to the sitting room, my mind racing. What could he possibly want? As he sat down, he studied me carefully. "I was up all night thinking," he began. "I couldn't shake the feeling that I've seen you before." I frowned, unsure where this was going. "I don't think we've met." "Perhaps not directly," he said, pulling out his phone. "But does this look familiar?" He showed me a photograph. My breath caught in my throat. It was of my parents. They were younger, smiling brightly at what looked like a formal event, and standing next to them was a younger version of Mr. Hawkins. How do you have this?" I whispered. "I was close friends with your parents many years ago," he said, his voice softening. "Your father and I worked together, and your mother was like a sister to me. When I saw you last night, I couldn't believe my eyes. You're their daughter, aren't you?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. "Yes, but they passed away years ago." He leaned back, his expression a mix of sorrow and relief. I had no idea. They spoke of you often, how proud they were of you. I lost touch with them after they moved, and I always regretted it. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Mr. Hawkins' words were like a lifeline, pulling me out of the darkness I had been drowning in. He asked about my life, and I hesitated to share too much, but something about his genuine concern made me open up. I'm glad I found you, he said finally. Your parents were extraordinary people, and I owe them so much. If there's ever anything you need, don't hesitate to ask. I nodded, still overwhelmed by the revelation. As he left, he gave me one last look and said, "You deserve better than this." Those words echoed in my mind long after he was gone. In the days following Mr. Hawkins' visit, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. His words lingered in my mind, offering a faint sense of hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I wasn't entirely alone in this world. My parents' memory, through him, became a thread connecting me to something greater, a sense of belonging that I had lost. Eleanor, however, wasn't blind to the change in me. While I continued my duties, something about my demeanor must have shifted. One morning, as I was scrubbing the kitchen counters, she approached me with her usual air of superiority. "You've been awfully quiet lately," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Not that you're one for conversation, but you seem distracted." I shook my head quickly. "I've just been tired." She studied me for a moment before nodding. "Well, keep your focus. We're hosting another dinner next week. Gerald's promotion depends on securing Mr. Hawkins' partnership." My heart sank. Another dinner? The idea of being paraded around like a servant again made me nauseous. But then I remembered Mr. Hawkins' parting words, "You deserve better than this." A few days before the scheduled dinner, I found an envelope addressed to me on the hall table. It wasn't the type of thing Eleanor or Gerald would bother with. They never acknowledged my personal life. Curious, I opened it and was stunned to find a handwritten letter from Mr. Hawkins. "Dear Ava, it was truly a shock to see you again, but also a blessing. Your parents were dear to me, and I can't bear the thought of their daughter being treated unfairly. I have arranged for an opportunity that I believe could change your circumstances. If you're willing, come to my office this Friday at noon. I'll explain everything. Warm regards, Daniel Hawkins." My hands trembled as I read the letter. Could this really be happening? Was this the lifeline I had been praying for? Friday arrived, and I could barely contain my nerves. I told Eleanor I had errands to run and left the house, clutching the letter like a talisman. As I entered Mr. Hawkins' office building, my heart raced. The receptionist guided me to his office, where he greeted me with a warm smile. "I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing for me to sit. He explained that he had connections in a nearby nonprofit organization that supported women in difficult situations. He believed they could help me build a new life, one where I could rediscover my sense of self-worth and independence. "But there's more," he said, leaning forward. "Your parents left behind a trust fund in your name. I helped them set it up years ago, but I lost track of it when they passed. It's modest, but it's enough to give you a fresh start." Tears streamed down my face as I listened. The idea of starting over felt like a distant dream finally within reach. That evening, I returned home with renewed resolve. I knew Eleanor and Gerald would never let me go easily. They thrived on control. But now, I had something they didn't know about, a plan, a future, and the means to escape. I began quietly packing a few belongings, hiding them in the attic. Each day, I worked discreetly to gather what I would need. The upcoming dinner felt like the perfect cover. While their attention was focused on impressing Mr. Hawkins, I could slip away unnoticed. As the dinner approached, I found myself smiling more often, even humming as I worked. Eleanor noticed, but misinterpreted it as compliance. "Good," she said with a rare nod of approval. "You're finally understanding your place." If only she knew. The evening of the dinner arrived, bringing with it a storm of nerves and anticipation. Eleanor was in full command mode, barking orders at everyone to ensure perfection. Gerald, for his part, was too busy rehearsing his business pitch to Mr. Hawkins to notice anything out of the ordinary. I moved about the house methodically, my heart racing with each passing moment. Tonight would be my last night here. Guests began arriving, including Mr. Hawkins, who greeted me with a knowing smile. His presence was a reminder of the escape plan I'd meticulously crafted. The atmosphere in the dining room buzzed with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses. As expected, Eleanor had instructed me to stay in the kitchen, serving dishes and refilling drinks. But Mr. Hawkins wasn't content to let me stay in the shadows. "Ava," he called out when I entered with a platter of appetizers, "why don't you join us?" After all, we've got much to talk about. Eleanor's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. Oh, there's no need for that, she said hastily, laughing nervously. She's here to help, not to dine. But Mr. Hawkins wasn't deterred. I insist, he said, his tone polite but firm. Ava is like family to me. I won't have her treated otherwise. The room fell silent. Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Eleanor sputtered for a response. Reluctantly, they allowed me to sit. I could feel Eleanor's eyes burning into me, but I kept my composure, buoyed by Mr. Hawkins' support. As the meal progressed, the conversation turned to my parents. Mr. Hawkins shared stories about them, how my father had been his closest friend and how my mother's kindness had touched everyone she met. For the first time in years, I felt like they weren't just a distant memory, they were alive in the room, in the words of someone who had truly known them. It was then that Mr. Hawkins dropped the bombshell. Ava, he said, addressing me directly, have you told them about the trust fund your parents left for you? My heart stopped. I glanced at Eleanor and Gerald, whose expressions twisted from confusion to shock. Trust fund? Gerald repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. Yes, Mr. Hawkins continued, turning his gaze to them. Her parents left her a considerable amount to ensure she'd never have to rely on anyone else. I'm appalled to see how that generosity has been ignored. Eleanor stammered, trying to regain control. We weren't aware. She never mentioned it. I met her gaze for the first time that evening, my voice steady, because you never asked. The tension in the room was palpable. Gerald tried to defuse it, laughing nervously. Well, this is a misunderstanding. Of course, Ava will have access to her funds. Isn't that right, Eleanor? But Eleanor's veneer cracked. She's ungrateful. After everything we've done for her, giving her a roof, food, this is how she repays us? Mr. Hawkins interrupted, his voice calm but firm. If by roof and food, you mean exploitation and mistreatment, then yes, Eleanor, this is how she repays you, by reclaiming her life. For the first time, I saw Eleanor rendered speechless. Gerald, too, slumped in his chair, his bluster evaporating. After dinner, I quietly gathered the bag I had packed and headed for the door. Mr. Hawkins followed, offering me a ride to the apartment he had arranged for me through his nonprofit connections. As I left, I felt a mixture of emotions, relief, empowerment, and a bittersweet sense of closure. Eleanor and Gerald didn't even try to stop me. They must have realized their grip on me was broken. The next morning, I woke up in a small but cozy apartment, my apartment. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I started attending workshops at the nonprofit, where I learned skills to rebuild my life. Mr. Hawkins continued to be a mentor, guiding me through the process of managing the trust fund and pursuing my dreams. Most importantly, I began to find myself again. I wasn't just someone's servant or charity case. I was Ava, a woman with a future. Months later, I sat in a small cafe, sipping coffee and reading a book. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The weight of the past had lifted, replaced by a sense of possibility. I thought of my parents often, not with sadness, but with gratitude. They had given me the strength to endure, and now I was finally living the life they had wanted for me. As for Eleanor and Gerald, I heard through the grapevine that Gerald didn't get his promotion. It seemed karma had its own way of balancing the scales. But I wasn't focused on them anymore. My life was ahead of me, and I was ready to embrace it. I never imagined my life would change so drastically. Growing up, my parents had been my rock, my constant support. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy. When I lost them in a tragic car accident just 2 years after my marriage to Liam, my world fell apart. Their absence left a void that I thought could never be filled. At first, Liam was supportive, holding me as I cried myself to sleep night after night. But things began to shift subtly, like a shadow creeping in at the edges of my life. Liam came from a well-off family. His parents, Harold and Marjorie, were influential, wealthy, and, most of all, cold. They had never approved of me. Marjorie once told me at a family gathering, "You're lucky my son sees something in you. Don't forget where you come from." I brushed it off then, thinking it was just her way of asserting dominance. But after my parents' death, her words seemed to echo in every interaction we had. Initially, I moved in with Liam's family temporarily while we searched for a new place. What started as temporary, though, turned into something far more sinister. Marjorie's disdain turned into outright hostility. She assigned me chores around the house as if I were the live-in maid. "If you're staying under this roof, you'll need to pull your weight," she'd say with a saccharine smile that barely masked her contempt. At first, I complied without complaint. After all, I was grieving and didn't want to cause trouble. But soon, it became clear that this wasn't just about helping out. Harold and Marjorie treated me as if I were beneath them. They'd host lavish dinners, inviting their high society friends, while I was relegated to serving drinks and cleaning up afterward. Once, during one of these events, Marjorie's voice cut through the room like a whip. "Sarah, dear, you missed a spot," she sneered, pointing to a speck of dust on the mantel. The guests laughed, and my cheeks burned with humiliation. Liam, standing nearby, said nothing. I tried to talk to Liam about it that night. "Your parents treat me like I'm their servant," I said, my voice trembling. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They're just old-fashioned. Sarah, don't take it personally. It's their house, after all." "Old-fashioned?" I repeated incredulously. "Liam, they're demeaning me, can't you see that?" "Just let it go," he said, turning away. That was the beginning of the wedge that started to grow between us. One evening, Marjorie's friend, Evelyn, came over for tea. I was in the kitchen, preparing a tray, when I overheard their conversation. "Honestly, Marjorie," Evelyn said, "why does she even stay here? You'd think she'd have some pride." Marjorie's laugh was icy. "She has nowhere else to go. Poor thing. She's just lucky we're so charitable." The words cut through me like shards of glass. I wanted to march into the room and confront them, but I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. As the months passed, their treatment grew worse. Harold would make snide comments about how people like me didn't understand the value of hard work, despite the fact that I had been juggling 2 jobs to help Liam through college before we got married. Marjorie, meanwhile, seemed to delight in finding new ways to humiliate me. Once, during a family dinner, she asked, "Sarah, do you even know which fork to use?" The table erupted in laughter, and I felt like sinking into the floor. But the breaking point came one fateful evening. Harold announced that his boss, Mr. Grant, would be coming over for dinner. "This is an important night," he said, looking pointedly at me. "Try not to embarrass us, Sarah." That night, as I set the table with trembling hands, I resolved to endure whatever insults came my way. For Liam's sake, I told myself, but deep down, a part of me wondered how much longer I could take it. Little did I know, that evening would change everything. As the months wore on, my situation with Thomas's family continued to worsen. Despite my best efforts to blend into their world and earn their respect, nothing I did seemed good enough. Each day blurred into the next, with tasks piling up and the disdain from my in-laws becoming more overt. I found myself waking up before sunrise to prepare breakfast for the entire family. By the time I sat down to eat, Thomas's mother, Elaine, would click her tongue disapprovingly. "This toast is overdone," she'd complain. Or, "Didn't I tell you I prefer my eggs sunny side up?" It didn't matter how much effort I put in, she always found a flaw. Thomas's father, Richard, wasn't much better. He often treated me like invisible help. If Elaine had guests over, Richard would bark at me to refill glasses or serve hors d'oeuvres, all while ignoring my existence otherwise. I felt like a stranger in the home I had once thought of as my refuge. Thomas, once my biggest supporter, now seemed indifferent to my struggles. When I tried to talk to him, he would brush me off. "They're just set in their ways," he'd say. "You've got to learn to pick your battles, Mia." But how could I pick my battles when I felt like I was fighting a war on all fronts? My breaking point came one evening when Elaine invited some of her friends over for a dinner party. She spent the entire day barking orders at me, making sure the house was spotless and the menu impeccable. I was exhausted by the time the guests arrived, but I put on a polite smile and carried out the tasks she assigned me. Toward the end of the evening, one of Elaine's friends asked about my family. I hesitated for a moment, then explained that I had lost my parents at a young age and had grown up in foster care. The room fell silent, and I immediately regretted sharing. Elaine broke the awkward tension with a forced laugh. "Well, that explains why you're so good at handling things on your own," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Her friends chuckled politely, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. For the rest of the evening, I felt like I was on display, a curiosity for these well-heeled women to dissect. Later that night, I confronted Thomas in our room. Your mother humiliated me tonight, I said, my voice trembling. Thomas barely looked up from his phone. You're overreacting, Mia. She didn't mean anything by it. How can you say that? You heard her. He sighed heavily, as if I were the one inconveniencing him. You need to stop making everything about you. My parents have done so much for us. I stared at him in disbelief. So that gives them the right to treat me like I'm beneath them? Thomas didn't answer, and I realized that the man I had married, the man who had once promised to stand by me no matter what, was no longer the same. The next day, while running errands for Elaine, I stopped at a small cafe to grab a coffee. As I waited in line, I overheard a conversation at the table behind me. A man in a sharp suit was speaking animatedly about a new charity project he was spearheading. His voice was warm and inviting, and for a moment, I felt a pang of longing. When I turned to glance at him, our eyes met. He smiled, and I quickly looked away, embarrassed. Little did I know, that chance encounter would change the trajectory of my life. That evening, Elaine announced with great fanfare that Richard's boss, Mr. Harrington, would be joining us for dinner the following week. She was in a flurry of excitement, directing preparations like a military general. This is a big opportunity for your father-in-law, she said. Don't screw it up, Mia. I wanted to roll my eyes, but I bit my tongue. I knew this dinner would be another test, and I braced myself for whatever was to come. The days leading up to the dinner were grueling. I spent hours cleaning every corner of the house, polishing silverware, and perfecting recipes under Elaine's watchful eye. By the time the evening arrived, I was too tired to even feel nervous. As the guests began to arrive, I tried to stay in the background, serving drinks and making myself as inconspicuous as possible. But when Mr. Harrington walked through the door, my heart stopped. It was the same man I had seen at the cafe. He paused when he saw me, his brow furrowing slightly. Mia? Everyone turned to look at me. I froze, unsure of how to respond. You two know each other? Richard asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Mr. Harrington's face broke into a smile. Oh, we go way back, don't we, Mia? The room buzzed with curiosity, and I could feel Elaine's eyes burning into me. I had no idea how to explain this twist of fate, but one thing was clear, everything was about to change. The moment hung heavy in the air as everyone waited for me to respond. My mind raced, trying to process Mr. Harrington's words. We did go way back, but not in the way anyone in this room might imagine. Why yes, I stammered. Mr. Harrington knew my parents. Richard's eyes narrowed, clearly suspicious. Elaine, ever the perfectionist host, tried to diffuse the tension with a forced laugh. Well, what a small world. Please, come in, Mr. Harrington. As dinner progressed, the conversation seemed to center around Mr. Harrington. As everyone fawned over his stories of success, I quietly served dishes, keeping my head down and avoiding his gaze. But every so often, I'd catch him watching me with a curious expression. Finally, as the evening began to wind down, Mr. Harrington asked to speak with me privately. Elaine looked displeased, but she didn't dare argue with someone of his status. We stepped into the hallway, and he turned to me with an incredulous expression. Mia, is it really you? I can't believe this. How have you been? Hearing the genuine concern in his voice brought tears to my eyes. It's been difficult, I admitted. He nodded, his brow furrowing. After your parents passed, I lost touch with you. I tried to find out where you'd gone, but I ended up in the foster system, I said quietly. His face fell. I'm so sorry, Mia. Your parents were dear friends of mine. They would be heartbroken to know what you've been through. I didn't know what to say. The flood of memories from my childhood, coupled with the overwhelming kindness in his voice, made me feel a mixture of relief and sorrow. Mr. Harrington's concern didn't end there. As he prepared to leave, he asked Richard and Elaine if I could see him to his car. They reluctantly agreed, clearly eager to maintain their connection to such an influential figure. As we walked down the driveway, he turned to me and said, Mia, you don't belong here. They treat you like you're nothing, but I can see that you've grown into a strong, capable woman. Your parents would be proud of you. Tears welled up in my eyes again. No one had spoken to me like this in years. I don't have anywhere else to go, I said, my voice trembling. He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You have me now. I'll help you get back on your feet, I promise. Over the next few days, Mr. Harrington's words stayed with me. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. I began to imagine a life beyond the walls of Thomas's family home, a life where I could reclaim my sense of self-worth. But breaking free wasn't going to be easy. I knew that Elaine and Richard would never let me go without a fight. They saw me as nothing more than a convenient housekeeper, someone who could be easily controlled. That's when Mr. Harrington reached out to me with a plan. One afternoon, while Elaine and Richard were out, I received a call from Mr. Harrington. He told me about a job opening at his company, one that he believed I'd be perfect for. I know it's a lot to process, he said, but I want you to think about it. This could be your chance to start fresh. I hesitated. The idea of working for someone as accomplished as Mr. Harrington was both exciting and intimidating, but more than that, I feared how Thomas and his family would react if they found out. You deserve this, Mia, he added. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. That evening, as I tried to muster the courage to tell Thomas about the opportunity, a confrontation erupted. Elaine stormed into the kitchen, furious that I had forgotten to polish the silverware for an upcoming party. You can't even do the simplest tasks right, she snapped. Before I could respond, Thomas chimed in. Mom's right, Mia, you've been slipping up a lot lately. His words felt like a slap in the face. After everything I had endured, this was how they saw me? Something inside me snapped. I thought of Mr. Harrington's offer, of his belief in me, and of the life I could have if I was brave enough to take a step forward. I looked Thomas in the eye and said, I'm done. His brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I'm done being treated like a servant. I'm done living in a house where I'm not respected. I'm leaving. The room fell silent. Elaine and Richard stared at me in shock, and for once, Thomas had no words. That night, I packed my things and left. As I walked out the door, I felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let anyone hold me back anymore. I stood on the sidewalk outside Thomas's family home, clutching my small bag of belongings. The house loomed behind me, cold and unwelcoming, but as I took my first steps away, I felt the weight begin to lift from my shoulders. That night, I stayed at a small motel, using the little savings I had managed to squirrel away. I replayed the events of the day in my mind, wondering if I had made the right decision. Doubts crept in, but then I thought of Mr. Harrington's words. You don't belong there, Mia, you're capable of so much more. I resolved to believe in him and in myself. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrington to let him know I had left. He was relieved and immediately arranged for me to meet him at his office downtown. Walking into his sleek corporate building, I felt out of place. Everyone was dressed sharply, moving with purpose, and I couldn't help but feel self-conscious in my worn-out clothes. But when Mr. Harrington greeted me with a warm smile, some of my nervousness melted away. I'm so glad you came, he said, ushering me into his office. I've been thinking about how we can get you started on the right foot. He explained the job he had in mind for me, an entry-level administrative role. It wasn't glamorous, but it was an opportunity to learn, grow, and, most importantly, to earn my independence. You've got potential, Mia, he said. I see it. This is just the beginning. Starting at the company was daunting. I had little experience, and the learning curve was steep. There were moments when I doubted myself, times when I felt overwhelmed by the demands of the job, but every time I wanted to give up, I thought of where I had come from and where I wanted to go. Mr. Harrington became a mentor to me, offering guidance and encouragement whenever I needed it. Slowly but surely, I began to find my footing. I made friends among my colleagues, who were supportive and kind. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. As I settled into my new life, I began to confront the pain of my past. Losing my parents had left a hole in my heart, and the years of mistreatment had made me doubt my worth. But through therapy and self-reflection, I started to heal. One evening, I found myself sorting through a box of my parents' old belongings that Mr. Harrington had kept for me. Among the photos and keepsakes was a letter my mother had written to me years ago. It read, Mia, life will have its challenges, but never forget how strong and capable you are. You have a kind heart, and that will take you far. Always believe in yourself, even when it feels impossible. Reading her words brought tears to my eyes. I realized that, despite everything, I was living the life my parents would have wanted for me, a life of dignity, hope, and possibility. Several months later, I ran into Thomas at a coffee shop. He looked surprised to see me, and, to my astonishment, a little ashamed. Mia, he said awkwardly, I've been meaning to reach out. I crossed my arms, unsure of what to say. Listen, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I didn't treat you right. None of us did. I'm sorry. His apology was unexpected, and while part of me wanted to lash out, I chose a different path. Thank you, I said simply. I hope you've learned from it. Walking away from him, I felt a sense of closure. I no longer needed validation from Thomas or his family. I had found my own strength. 1 year after leaving Thomas's family, I had built a life I was proud of. I had been promoted at work, moved into a cozy apartment, and even started taking classes to further my education. Mr. Harrington remained a guiding presence in my life, and I was grateful for his kindness. But more than that, I was proud of myself, for taking the leap, for persevering, and for rediscovering my worth. As I sat on my balcony one evening, watching the sunset, I thought about my journey. Life hadn't been easy, but it had taught me resilience. I whispered into the fading light, "Thank you, Mom and Dad. I'm finally living the life you always wanted for me," and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace.
Hi, I'm Jessica Chen, and this is the story of how my mother's cruelest words became the foundation of my success. They say the best revenge is living well, but sometimes living well means watching your tormentors realize exactly what they threw away. I can still hear her voice on that rainy November night, sharp as broken glass. "You're worthless, just like your father. Get out of my house." I was 18, fresh out of high school, clutching an acceptance letter to a local community college. My crime? Choosing to study computer science instead of following my mother's dream of me becoming a doctor. Linda Chen, my mother, had always been obsessed with status. After divorcing my father when I was 12, she'd rebuilt her image as a successful real estate agent in our affluent suburban community. Our house was a showcase of her success, all gleaming hardwood and crystal chandeliers. But beneath that perfect surface lay a woman who measured everything and everyone by their potential to elevate her social status. "Computer science?" she'd sneered, reading my college plans. "Do you want to fix printers for minimum wage your whole life? No daughter of mine will embarrass me like this." I tried explaining about artificial intelligence, software development, the growing tech industry, but Mom was already typing on her phone, barely listening. "I've already told everyone you're pre-med. The Wang's daughter is starting at Johns Hopkins this fall. How am I supposed to hold my head up at the country club now?" That's when I made my fatal mistake. Maybe if you spent less time at the country club and more time understanding what I want. The slap caught me off guard, sending my glasses flying. In the ringing silence that followed, Mom's perfectly manicured hand shook with rage. "You ungrateful little snake," she hissed. "I gave up everything to give you the best life. Your loser father hasn't paid child support in years. But I made sure you had designer clothes, piano lessons, everything. And this is how you repay me." She stormed upstairs, and for a moment I thought that was the end of it, just another of her dramatic outbursts. Then she returned with a garbage bag full of my clothes, throwing it at my feet. "Get out. Go live with your worthless father if you want to throw your life away. I won't watch you become a failure." "Mom, please." I said, "Gee, out, Gee." She grabbed my arm, nails digging in, and practically dragged me to the door. "Don't come crawling back when you're living in some filthy apartment fixing computers for minimum wage." The door slammed behind me, leaving me alone in the rain. I was 18, had $342 in my savings account, and nowhere to go. My father lived 3 states away, struggling to keep his small computer repair shop afloat. I hadn't seen him in person since the divorce. That night, sitting in a 24-hour diner with my garbage bag of belongings, I made 2 calls. The first was to my father. "Come stay with me, Jesse," he said immediately, his voice warm despite the static on the line. "It's not much, but we'll figure something out." The second call was to decline my community college acceptance. If I was going to prove my mother wrong, I needed to think bigger. The next few years were a blur of work and study. I moved in with Dad above his repair shop, taking online courses while helping him modernize his business. His shop, Chen's Computer Repair, became my crash course in both technology and business management. "Your mother always said I was dreaming too small," Dad told me one night as we worked late upgrading a client's servers. Maybe I was, but sometimes small dreams are the seeds of bigger ones. He was right. While helping local businesses with their needs, I noticed a common problem. Small companies needed enterprise-level cybersecurity but couldn't afford the expensive solutions big corporations used. That observation became the seed of everything that followed. I spent my nights coding, developing a simplified but robust security suite specifically for small businesses. Dad let me test early versions on his clients, their feedback helping me refine the software. When I wasn't coding or helping in the shop, I was teaching myself about business planning, marketing, and startup funding. 3 years after being thrown out, I launched Secure Small, my cybersecurity startup. The timing was perfect. A wave of ransomware attacks had just targeted small businesses across the country, and our affordable solution quickly gained traction. Dad was my first investor, remortgaging his shop to give me seed money. "I believe in you, Jesse," he said, signing the papers. "Show them what a worthless person can do." The next few years were a rocket ride. Secure Small expanded from cybersecurity into other small business solutions. We opened offices in 3 cities. I hired the best developers I could find, many of them overlooked talents from non-traditional backgrounds. By my 28th birthday, Secure Small was valued at $80 million, and I was being featured in technology magazines as a rising star in the industry. I never Googled my mother during those years, though I knew she still lived in the same house, still sold real estate to the same wealthy clients. Sometimes I imagined her at her country club, lying about her successful doctor-daughter living abroad. I wondered if anyone ever questioned why there were no pictures, no visits, no proof of this fictional successful child. Then came the day everything changed. I was in my corner office, reviewing acquisition offers from larger tech companies, when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Chen, there's a Linda Chen here to see you. She claims she's your mother." I felt the old familiar tightness in my chest, but this time it was different. This time, I was different. "Send her in," I said. The woman who walked through my door looked smaller than I remembered. Her designer suit was a few seasons old, her smile strained, but her voice still carried that familiar mix of authority and disdain. "Jessica, darling, I've been trying to reach you." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. "Finally," I said. "Really? The last words you spoke to me were that I was worthless. That was 10 years ago." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, sweetheart, you know I didn't mean that. I was just worried about your future. And look at you now, so successful. I always knew you had it in you." "Why are we here, Mom?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Well, as your mother, I thought it was time we reconnected. And actually, I'm between positions right now. The real estate market isn't what it used to be. I thought perhaps, given your company's success, you might have a place for me. Something in client relations maybe? You know how good I am with people." I looked at the woman who had thrown me out with nothing, who had called me worthless, who had chosen her social status over her own daughter. And I smiled. "Actually, Mom, we do have an opening. Why don't you come back tomorrow morning? 8 a.m. sharp. We'll see exactly what you're worth to this company." She beamed, completely missing the edge in my voice. "Oh, wonderful. I knew you wouldn't let your mother down. The Wams will be so impressed when I tell them." "No announcements yet," I cut in smoothly. "Let's see how tomorrow goes first." After she left, I made several calls. Tomorrow would indeed show everyone exactly what people were worth, and it would be a lesson my mother would never forget. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. Everything had to be perfect for what I had planned. My mother arrived at 7:58, wearing her most expensive suit, her smile bright with anticipation. "Jessica, darling, I brought coffee for my successful daughter." She held up a cup from an expensive cafe, the kind she used to say I'd never be able to afford. "Follow me, Mom," I said, leading her not to my office but to the main conference room. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw it was full of people, our entire management team, several board members, and in the center, my father. "John, what are you doing here?" She nearly dropped her coffee. Dad just smiled, the same gentle smile he'd worn when he remortgaged his shop to fund my dreams. "Please, take a seat, Mom." I gestured to the only empty chair, positioned directly under the main screen. "You wanted to see what position you might be worth in this company. Let's discuss that." I moved to the front of the room, clicking to the first slide. It showed a garbage bag full of clothes on a rainy doorstep. 10 years ago, Linda Chen threw her 18-year-old daughter out of the house for choosing to study computer science instead of medicine. She called that daughter worthless. I clicked to the next slide, security footage from that night at the diner. That daughter had $342 to her name. Mom's face had gone pale. Jessica, this is hardly appropriate for a business meeting. Oh, but it is, I continued smoothly, because Secure Small's core values are built on recognizing worth in unexpected places. We hire talented developers who taught themselves coding in libraries because they couldn't afford college. We create solutions for small businesses that bigger companies deemed worthless. Everything we do is about seeing the value others miss. I clicked through more slides. Dad's shop, early versions of our software, our first tiny office. When we evaluate potential employees, we look at three things: their skills, their character, and their judgment of worth. So let's evaluate Linda Chen. I turned to face her directly. Skills first. You were a successful real estate agent, specializing in luxury properties. But according to public records, you haven't closed a sale in 8 months. Your license is currently suspended pending investigation of misrepresented property values. Mom's face flushed red. That was a simple misunderstanding. Character next, I continued as if she hadn't spoken. You abandoned your ex-husband when his business struggled, then prevented him from seeing his daughter. You threw that daughter out for not conforming to your image of success. And now that you're facing financial difficulties, you've come to the daughter you called worthless, expecting a job. The room was dead silent. Even the usual traffic sounds from outside seemed muted. Finally, judgment of worth. 10 years ago, you looked at a bright, ambitious 18-year-old and saw nothing of value because she didn't fit your narrow definition of success. You looked at a hardworking small business owner and saw a loser. Your judgment of worth has consistently been not just poor, but actively harmful. I clicked to the final slide, a comparison of two numbers. This is interesting, Mom. The first number is the current value of your suspended real estate license and frozen assets, approximately $42,000. The second is Secure Small's latest valuation, $80 million. Quite a gap between your judgment of worth and reality. Mom stood up, her hands shaking. I get it, Jessica. You've made your point. You're successful, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. Now can we discuss my position here like adults? I smiled. Oh, we are discussing your position. In fact, I do have a job for you. Her eyes lit up with hope. We're launching a new initiative to provide a training in cybersecurity solutions to small computer repair shops. Dad's shop was our prototype location. We're expanding to 500 shops nationwide this year. I handed her a folder. Inside you'll find a job offer. Entry-level technical support. 6-month probationary period. Starting salary matches our standard entry-level package. You'll work at Dad's shop, learning the basics of the industry you once dismissed. If you complete the training successfully, you'll have the opportunity to advance based solely on your merit, not your connections, not your status, not your relation to me. She stared at the folder like it might bite her. Technical support? At John's shop? But I'm your mother. No, Mom. 10 years ago, you made it very clear I wasn't your daughter anymore because I was worthless. You can't take that back just because my worth now comes with dollar signs attached. I turned to the room, meeting adjourned, everyone. Thank you for your time. As people filed out, Mom remained frozen in her chair, clutching the folder. The choice is yours, I said quietly. You can take the job, learn the industry from the ground up, and maybe eventually understand what real worth looks like. Or you can walk away. Either way, this is the only offer you'll ever get from me. Dad waited by the door as Mom slowly stood up, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. I need time to think, she whispered. Take 24 hours, I replied, just like you gave me 10 years ago. After she left, Dad wrapped me in a hug. You okay, Jessie? I nodded against his shoulder. You know what's funny, Dad? Part of me hoped she'd take one look at that entry-level offer and storm out in outrage. It would prove she hadn't changed at all. And now? Now I almost hope she takes it, not for her sake, but because maybe, just maybe, she'll learn what we learned. That worth isn't about status or appearances. It's about what you build, what you contribute, how you treat people. The next morning, I arrived at work to find Mom waiting in reception, wearing a simple blouse instead of her designer suit. I'll take the job, she said quietly. I nodded. Report to Dad's shop tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late. As I watched her leave, I thought about worth. How we measure it, how we create it, how we recognize it in others. My mother had thrown away a daughter in search of status. She'd lost everything chasing an image of success. Now she had a chance to learn what real success looked like, from the ground up. Would she learn? Only time would tell. But I had already learned the most valuable lesson. Sometimes being called worthless is just the beginning of proving your true worth. Today, Securus Mall continues to grow. We've helped thousands of small businesses protect themselves in the digital age. Mom, she's still working at Dad's shop, slowly learning the industry she once dismissed. Sometimes, when I visit the shop, I catch her watching me with a mixture of pride and regret. Last week, she successfully completed her first solo computer repair. Dad sent me a photo of her proud smile, so different from her old country club smirk. Maybe she's finally learning that real worth isn't in what you appear to be, but in what you actually do. As for me, I keep that old garbage bag in my office closet. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder that being called worthless doesn't make it true. Sometimes it just means others fail to see your worth. And proving them wrong, that's the sweetest success of all. Hello, are you Yumi's mother? I'm calling from the nursery school. Ha! What is it? I was puzzled by the sudden call from the nursery school. At first, I thought it might be some kind of prank, but then the teacher on the other end of the line spoke in a somewhat stern tone. Could you please come to pick up Yumi? The time we can keep her has already passed. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing. I am sorry, but my daughter passed away a month ago. My name is Hazel. I'm 28 years old, and I work as a company employee. Currently, I'm dating a man named Nathan. We met at a mixer, and since we were the same age and had similar interests, we hit it off. He seemed like a typical company employee, stable, calm, and sensible. These qualities are important to me, especially since we're at an age where marriage is on the horizon. It's no longer just about appearances. Nathan is a kind person who exceeds my expectations and makes me feel at ease. On our dates, he always comes up with creative ideas, and when we spend time at his place, he prepares delicious meals with impressive skill. This eggplant dish is really good, isn't it? He said one evening, serving up a meal. It's surprisingly easy. I just make it quickly in the microwave. That's amazing. You're really good at Japanese cuisine, I replied, impressed. Yeah, actually my family runs a small restaurant. Really? This was something I learned when we first started dating. Nathan's family lives in the countryside and operates a small restaurant. He learned to cook from his father, who is a chef, and as a result, he's very skilled in the kitchen, capable of making a variety of dishes. Do you have any siblings? I asked. Yeah, I have a younger sister, he answered. Knowing that he had a sister meant he was the eldest son, which made me wonder if he might take over the family business someday. What are you thinking about doing in the future? You know, with your job, I inquired. After a pause, he replied, after working at the company for a bit longer, I plan to return to my hometown and take over the family's small restaurant. I think I'll start with a training period. Oh, is that so? I was a bit taken aback by his plans. If we were to get married, I'd have to leave my current job and move with him. I work as a web designer, and I really enjoy my job. I hadn't considered quitting anytime soon, but at the same time, I wanted to be with Nathan. Before I knew it, I found myself discussing this dilemma with a senior colleague at work. Then why don't you try applying for remote work? She suggested. Really? The advantage of our job is that we can do it anywhere as long as we have a computer. If you manage your work properly, some companies will allow you to work from home. I'm sure your company can accommodate that too. Is that so? Hearing her words filled me with hope. This meant I could continue my current job even if I moved with Nathan. In fact, after I talked to Nathan about the future, he admitted that he had been thinking he would have to make me quit my job and take me with him if we got married, which had made things feel a bit awkward between us. I immediately asked my boss if it was possible to switch to remote work. If you meet the criteria set by the company, there should be no problem, was the response. As for the internet connection and computer, everything was falling into place. This meant that if I wanted to, I could move to Nathan's hometown right away. After confirming with my boss, I shared the news with Nathan on our next date. Really? So you mean you can continue your current job while living in my hometown? He asked, a mixture of surprise and relief on his face. Yes, that's possible, I replied with a smile. That's great. He looked genuinely relieved, and seeing his expression made me feel the same way. It didn't take long after that for us to decide to get married. Hazel, if you don't mind, would you marry me and move to my hometown? Nathan asked one evening, his voice filled with sincerity. Yes, I'd love to, I said without hesitation. And so, we decided to tie the knot. When I told my parents about the move, they seemed a bit sad but ultimately supported me, sending me off with the words, "Be happy." Nathan and I got married and started our life together. He began working at his family's small restaurant under his father's guidance. Since the restaurant was next to his parents' house, we initially lived with them. At the suggestion of my in-laws, who wanted Nathan to focus on learning the business without worrying about household chores, they proposed that we stay with them to lighten our load. However, I would later realize that this decision was a mistake. Living with my in-laws turned out to be more challenging than I had anticipated. Hazel, how long do you intend to stay holed up in your room? My mother-in-law, Susan, said one day, knocking on the door forcefully. I'm working, Susan. I'm actually working right now, I explained. Working? You're always in your room. What kind of work are you doing? Are you trying to deceive me with that excuse? She retorted, her tone filled with suspicion. I'll never accept it, my mother-in-law declared. But I really am working, I insisted. Don't lie. You're just playing around, drawing pictures on that computer, aren't you? She snapped, glancing at my screen. This is called web design. It's my job, I explained, trying to remain patient. I won't be fooled. It's shameful for an adult to be wasting time drawing pictures, she retorted. My mother-in-law likely held old-fashioned views and didn't seem to grasp the concept of working from home. To her, I wasn't really working. I was just cooped up at home, neglecting household chores. I never thought I'd have such a lazy daughter-in-law. Nathan is working hard to become first class, and here you are, playing around like a parasite. Try to be more useful, she criticized almost daily, making it increasingly difficult for me to concentrate on my work. Desperate to change the situation, I decided to talk to my husband about it. Oh, my mom's getting in the way of your work? Nathan asked when I brought it up. Yes, it's like she doesn't understand I'm working from home. She thinks I'm just goofing off, I explained. I see. My mom has old-fashioned ideas, so it might be inevitable. I'll talk to her, he assured me. Nathan's support gave me some relief, but my mother-in-law was more stubborn than I had anticipated. How did you convince Nathan? Why do I have to be scolded? She fumed. It's clear you're just playing around. That's not it. I've been trying to explain. I protested, but our clashes only grew more frequent. Each time she made unreasonable remarks, I turned to Nathan for help. But over time, he seemed less willing to mediate. This is a problem between the two of you. Solve it yourselves, he said one day. Just as I was beginning to feel I couldn't take it anymore, something unexpected happened. Feeling unwell, I went to the hospital, only to be shocked by the news. I was pregnant. My mother-in-law had often pressured me to provide a successor, but I never imagined getting pregnant at such a tumultuous time. I immediately informed my husband and in-laws about the pregnancy. The news took everyone by surprise, but my mother-in-law was especially stunned. Well done, she said, clearly delighted. Both my husband and father-in-law were happy too, but my mother-in-law's joy was the most apparent. Since then, she had become much kinder to me. Hazel, how are you feeling? I'll handle the household chores so you don't overdo it, she offered. Her sudden change in attitude was a relief. The scolding and bullying that had once been a daily occurrence stopped, and instead, she became supportive and caring about my health. It was comforting to have the previously confrontational mother-in-law offer me support during this challenging time. Despite the initial strain on my relationship with my husband, things began to improve, and our bond grew stronger. I settled into a stable condition as I prepared for childbirth. However, a new issue emerged during this time. Sometime after the news of my pregnancy, my mother-in-law asked, "By the way, can you tell the baby's gender yet?" "Yes, it's a girl," I replied honestly. Her face fell with disappointment. "A girl? It should have been a boy. Our restaurant has always been passed down to males." Women inheriting such businesses is unheard of. I tried to reason with her. That's unacceptable. Nowadays, women can inherit businesses too. Her response was harsh. Don't try to justify yourself with your strange values. You're clearly not suited for this. Although my father-in-law and husband were slightly disappointed that the baby wasn't a boy, they weren't as upset as my mother-in-law. However, her disapproval quickly turned into hostility. Having no heir means you're worthless. How long are you going to stay in bed? Get up and do some housework, she demanded. I'm sorry, but I've been really sick with morning sickness, I explained. Don't be so spoiled. Pregnancy is not an illness. Get moving, she shouted as she came to wake me. Facing both poor health and harsh treatment, I decided to go against my in-laws' wishes and return to my parents' house for the birth. Spending time at my parents' home felt like a long-awaited relief. While I found great relief both mentally and physically during my time at my parents' home, it was clear that my stay with my in-laws had been a significant source of stress. After some time at my parents' place, my daughter was finally born. My husband and I had chosen the name Yi for her, and she was absolutely adorable. I made a firm promise to protect her with all my heart. Perhaps because the hospital where I gave birth was in my hometown, none of my in-laws visited. Not even once. I had hoped my husband would come, but he couldn't make it due to the restaurant's demands. After resting and regaining my health, I decided to return to my in-laws' home, but I quickly regretted it. My mother-in-law greeted me with an angry expression. You've taken your sweet time bringing back my grandchild. Why the delay? I'm sorry, I needed some rest, I explained. Rest? We've been incredibly busy. What do you mean by busy? She retorted. The restaurant was featured in magazines and on TV, and we've been fully booked every day. I even had to help out there, I said. I see. That's why I need you to come to the restaurant immediately, my mother-in-law demanded. Feeling overwhelmed, I saw no other option. My husband also urged me to help, explaining that the restaurant was in trouble. Reluctantly, I put my daughter in daycare and began assisting at my in-laws' restaurant. The real challenge started then. I had to work at the restaurant every day, manage all the household chores, and care for my child. My health was deteriorating, and on top of that, I was subjected to constant verbal abuse from my mother-in-law, which pushed me to my mental limits. Amidst all this, one day, I suddenly collapsed and was diagnosed with a stress-induced gastric ulcer. After regaining consciousness, I explained my situation to the doctor, who advised that I would need a longer hospital stay than usual. When I informed my mother-in-law, her response was devoid of concern. What a troubled woman, she said dismissively over the phone. Meanwhile, my husband apologized, saying, I'm sorry for pushing you too hard. But it felt too little, too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that he too was responsible for letting things spiral so badly. During my hospital stay, Rose, who worked at a small restaurant, came to my aid. I'll take care of you, she said. I'll handle the drop-offs and pickups for your daughter. Thank you so much, I said, deeply relieved. Rose's help with daycare was a lifeline, allowing me to focus on my recovery with some peace of mind. However, a few weeks into my hospitalization, I received a frantic call from my husband. Hazel, please calm down and listen. Yumi, she's died. She was caught in a big fire and her body couldn't be saved. The words struck me like a blow and I could barely process the news. I'm sorry, but I'm also suffering, he said. The shocking news left me deeply unsettled. When I returned to my in-laws' home after being discharged, I was met with the grim sight of an urn containing my daughter's ashes. Overwhelmed with grief, I was further stunned by my husband's next statement. I'm giving you this urn and asking for a divorce. I can't continue our marriage with the loss of our daughter and the ongoing issues with my mother. I understand if you're fed up with the situation. I am, I said. I'm done with your mother's bullying and your inability to protect me. I'll leave. Determined to move on, I decided to leave my in-laws' home and pursue a divorce. When I returned to my parents' house, their warm welcome provided a much-needed source of comfort in the depths of my sorrow. When I explained my situation to my company where I had been taking time off, they were understanding and allowed me to extend my leave. After a month of rest, I received an unexpected phone call. Hello, is this Yumi's mother? This is a staff member from the nursery. Why are you calling? I was initially puzzled and thought it might be a joke. But the voice on the other end was stern. Could you please come and pick up Yumi? It's past the time we can keep her. Confused, I replied, I'm sorry, but my daughter passed away a month ago. The teacher's tone shifted to anger. Why would you say such a thing? It's unthinkable to neglect your own child. Please come quickly. Overwhelmed by their reaction, I rushed to the nursery. To my shock, I found Yumi there, alive and laughing joyously. The relief of seeing her safe was immense. A teacher approached me, clearly having realized the misunderstanding. We were told by your mother-in-law that you were too busy to pick up Yumi, so she's been bringing her here daily. Hearing that my mother-in-law had falsely claimed Yumi was in my care while she was actually alive at the nursery filled me with rage. My contact information was listed as the emergency contact, which is why the nursery had called me. My husband and father-in-law had deceived me, and I was furious. Taking Yumi, I returned to my parents' home. As I settled in, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my mother-in-law. Why did you take Yumi back without permission? She yelled. I retorted, why did you lie about Yumi's death? I found out she was alive and left at the nursery. If you all want to lie to make things easier for yourselves, that ends now. I will raise my daughter myself. Do as you like, but don't contact me again. My mother-in-law was silent and then hung up. Fueled by anger, I resolved to uncover the full truth about the situation. I went to my in-laws' house armed with important documents. What are you doing here? My mother-in-law asked, visibly surprised. That day, the restaurant was closed and the whole family was at home, including another key person. I've come to discuss the affair between Nathan and Rose, I said. The mention of the affair visibly shook my in-laws. Affair? What are you talking about? My ex-husband asked, his face paling. I presented documents proving that Rose was pregnant and that Nathan was the father. According to these, Rose was pregnant around the time I gave birth. While I was in the dark, you two were involved in an affair that led to this pregnancy. To cover it up, you lied to me about Yumi's death. Their faces turned even whiter as they absorbed my words. I'm relieved that Yumi is safe, but I will be demanding compensation for my mental distress and child support, I declared. My ex-husband began to apologize profusely. I'm truly sorry. It was wrong. This was all my mother's idea, and I was against it. We intended to put Yumi in a child welfare institution. Child welfare institution? What are you talking about? I demanded. He revealed a shocking truth. The plan had been to fake Yumi's death and place her in a child welfare institution to avoid paying compensation and child support. My anger reached its peak. I'm truly sorry. Please, I beg you to overlook the compensation and child support, he pleaded. There's no way I can forgive that. I'm going to sue you. Be prepared, I replied, and left the house. Following these events, I demanded compensation from Nathan and Rose and sought child support from my ex-husband. I also detailed the situation to neighbors, regular customers of the restaurant, and mothers from the nursery school. The scandal spread quickly, tarnishing my in-laws' reputation. As word spread on social media and even new customers who had heard about the restaurant through magazines stopped coming, the family's small restaurant was forced to close within a year. It felt like just deserts for their despicable actions. Meanwhile, I continued working from home at my parents' house, focusing on raising my daughter. She's growing up well, and both my parents and I are delighted to see her thrive. I plan to keep working hard for her future.
Isabella, a renowned designer known for her creation of simple yet elegant dresses for affluent women, dedicated all her time and energy to her craft. At 35, she resided alone in a spacious studio apartment, furnished with only a comfortable bed and a small table where she enjoyed her morning coffee. The majority of the space was dominated by a large table holding fabric samples and her beloved sewing machine, a faithful companion in her solitary journey. Her social life took a backseat due to a flood of clothing orders from prestigious brands. Having never formed a family, Isabella once came close to marriage, but fate had other plans. She sighed, setting aside a folder of fabric samples in her attic studio, located in an elite district. The windows remained uncovered, allowing ample daylight to filter in. Isabella rose, tying the belt of her crisp white silk robe, and approached the window. The evening city below sparkled with golden lights, and farther away, The bay gleamed with lanterns along the main promenade. Evenings brought a stark awareness of her loneliness, unlike the busy days filled with creativity and work. The glittering city beneath made her feel like an invisible comet traversing a desolate cosmic space. Isabella sighed again, shifting her gaze from the distant city to her reflection in the glass. Her dark curly locks framed her face, and round reading glasses suited her well. Bright blue eyes, inherited from her mother, showed barely noticeable crow's feet. Isabella still possessed the beauty of her youth, often surprising others who assumed she was no older than 28. However, she believed such compliments were mere flattery. Looking into her own eyes, Isabella saw the echo of years spent in solitude, feeling akin to an ancient crone. Initially, she fought against this feeling, attempting to combat loneliness by donning a long black dress and wandering among brightly lit expensive storefronts or dropping into noisy bars. There, she would order lemonade, immersing herself in the music that once brought joy when shared with Javier, her fiancé. Memories of Javier's lively face and chestnut eyes filled with love haunted her, yet she rebuffed attempts by others to introduce themselves during her outings. Eventually, the walks became unbearable, leading Isabella to abandon evening excursions altogether. Instead, she immersed herself in her work, watched black and white movies, read, or doodled in her sketchbook until the late hours. Isabella ran her hand through her hair, pushing away memories. Turning from the window, she glanced at the wall clock. A gift from designer Hugo Martinez, its black and white dial showing 10 minutes to 10. Another call was imminent. The unraveling of Isabella's story began 7 years prior, a few months after her failed wedding. Suffering from the sudden disappearance of Javier, her fiancé, on their wedding day, Isabella mourned deeply. Taken in by her sister Mercedes and her husband, Isabella spent days staring blankly at the floral pattern on the wallpaper in a small room under the roof. It was in that room, as night approached and darkness enveloped her, that something peculiar occurred. Her unlit room became a canvas for disjointed images from the past. Memories of laughter, discussions of dreams, and promises of love flooded her mind. She vividly recalled the first date, walks in the park, and evenings by the fireplace. The room echoed with the chime of the old family clock striking 10, coinciding with the illumination of the room by a cold bluish-white light. Her mobile screen lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number ending in 49, the same numbers associated with the house on San Martin Street, where she and Javier had planned to build a life together. A tear rolled down Isabella's cheek as the call ended, only to be followed by the same numbers lighting up once more. Intrigued and somewhat apprehensive, Isabella answered the persistent call, her heart pounding. Yet the only response she received was a haunting silence. The next evening, precisely at 10 o'clock, the routine repeated itself. A call arrived from a different number, yet the enigmatic digits 49 persisted. Pressing the answer button, Isabella faced the familiar silence on the other end. Faint, intermittent breathing seemed to linger in the background, but certainty eluded her. Like clockwork, every day at 10 o'clock, the unknown number would grace her mobile screen, delivering nothing but ringing silence. Despite confiding in her sister about the mysterious calls and being advised to involve the police, Isabella hesitated. A peculiar sense of comfort and hope accompanied these daily occurrences, inexplicably soothing her. 7 years had passed, yet Isabella continued to anticipate the call with the digits 49, as if the universe communicated with her in this cryptic manner. Today, precisely at 10 o'clock, the phone rang once more. Holding it to her ear, Isabella immersed herself in the symbolic silence for a moment. "Good night to you too," she whispered to herself, ending the call. As she prepared to place the phone on the bedside table, it vibrated again in her hand. This time, a familiar number graced the screen. Hugo's name. They had collaborated on a collection 5 years ago, and he had gifted her the watch. Aware of Hugo's long-standing affection, Isabella had maintained a strictly professional relationship. "It's odd that he's calling so late," Isabella mused as she answered. "Hello, darling, how are you?" Hugo's friendly voice greeted her. "Hugo, it's me. I'm fine. Why are you calling at this hour?" Isabella inquired. "No worries, not asking you out on a date." Hugo chuckled, putting Isabella at ease. It was always challenging for her to decline Hugo's invitations, but she valued their friendship. "Just hear me out," Hugo urged. "My manager called. We've been invited to a major business conference in the capital. Everyone will be there, understand? A golden opportunity to showcase our new collections, attract prestigious clients, and break into the international market." Isabella. The weight of the moment left Isabella momentarily speechless. "I don't even know what to say," she stammered. "What if I can't handle it?" A dissatisfied grumble emanated from the other end. "How can you not handle it? You're a pro. Where else would we find someone like you? You'll ace the collection presentation. I have complete faith in you," Hugo reassured, eliciting a grateful smile from Isabella. Hugo always knew how to support her. "But how did you manage to arrange this?" she asked, curious. For Hugo Martinez, nothing is impossible, he chuckled, affirming his unwavering confidence. With wishes for a good night, Hugo hung up, leaving Isabella lying in bed, her mind buzzing with excitement. She had dreamed of European recognition for so long, but never did she expect Hugo to make it a reality. The subsequent weeks were a flurry of preparation. The collection, still in the sketch stage at the time of Hugo's call, demanded swift action, finding fabric samples, making purchases, and crafting the models. By early May, everything stood ready, with only the final polish needed for the presentation aimed at captivating wealthy compatriots and European businessmen. Hugo emailed the tickets, prompting Isabella to contemplate her attire for the conference. Opting for strict tones with a touch of boldness, she sought to make a memorable impression. Why not wear a hat? Hugo's suggestion resonated over the phone, instantly sparking an image in Isabella's mind. Isabella settled on a light-fitting trouser suit, strategically concealing a slightly protruding belly. Underneath, she wore a thin meshed turtleneck, and atop her head sat a huge pink hat, complemented by matching candy-colored shoes. Hugo gave his approval, dressed in a mint-colored shirt accentuating his bronze tan, light trousers, and the vest. "We definitely won't go unnoticed." Hugo chuckled over the phone, and Isabella concurred. Their hour-long flight had them seated apart. Hugo dozed off, while Isabella reviewed the presentation materials, her nervousness palpable with sweaty palms. Much hung in the balance, her future prospects and the realization of a long-standing dream. The woman couldn't fathom the significance this business meeting would hold for her. The prior evening, precisely at 10 p.m., the mysterious call had come again. In a moment of unexpected spontaneity, Isabella had declared, "Tomorrow, my dream will come true." Silence lingered on the other end, yet Isabella sensed a silent sigh. Before landing, she managed a brief 10-minute nap, accompanied by a peculiar dream. Walking down the street in a pink hat under bright sunshine, she suddenly remembered the impending conference. In a rush to call Hugo, she realized her phone was missing. Panic set in as a hurricane wind snatched her hat away, leaving her in despair as darkness descended, accompanied by the tolling of a bell -10 strikes. Upon awakening, Isabella found herself still in the grip of the vivid dream. Javier, her ex-fiancé, rarely visited her dreams, and this time he appeared as a tangible presence. The unsettling feeling lingered as the plane descended. Upon landing, Hugo's concern was evident. "You look so pale, Belle. Did you have a rough flight?" he asked. "I'm fine, Hugo. It'll pass soon," she reassured. Hugo handled their luggage, called a taxi, and took charge, allowing Isabella a moment to collect herself. Despite feeling unwell, she pressed on. Arriving at the hotel, Hugo assisted with check-in and accompanied her to her room, emphasizing the importance of a good night's rest. "Sleep, sleep, sleep," he encouraged. Isabella, still in the throes of her emotions, entered her room, showered, and nestled under the fluffy blanket. At 10 o'clock, the anticipated call never came. Isabella waited for minutes that stretched into half an hour. By midnight, tears flowed, the first time in years. "Where are you?" she whispered in despair. In the morning, a concerned Hugo woke her. "Belle, are you still asleep? The conference starts in 40 minutes. Isabella rushed to get ready, masking dark circles with foundation. The hat covered any hair mishaps. Descending to the lobby with presentation materials in hand, Hugo expressed relief. "Thank God you're on time, Belle, as always just a little tired," he remarked. "I slept very poorly," Isabella explained. "I understand," Hugo empathized. "I've called the taxi." In the car, swiftly arriving at a skyscraper with blue windows, Hugo consulted notes. "The conference will be on the 13th floor," he muttered. "Conference room number 49. Isabella froze. Hugo disapproved but refrained from comment. Entering the hall, a diverse crowd had gathered, renowned designers, fashion connoisseurs, and entrepreneurs worldwide. Seated at the front, Isabella momentarily forgot her worries. She was about to address this prestigious audience. Isabella extracted the presentation script from her folder, attempting to immerse herself in it, pushing the lingering unease in her soul aside to focus on her speech. The hall gradually filled with new faces, but Isabella hardly noticed. She only looked up from the text once to confirm that the rail displaying samples of her collection adorned the stage. Bright green feathers on dresses and the golden shimmer of sequins on jackets instantly caught her eye. Tears welled up as she was transported 7 years back, to the day she wore a radiant golden dress on her way to marry Javier. Refusing the traditional white wedding dress, she opted for audacious gold, a bold choice for her hometown. But in that moment, all she could think about was Javier and the eagerness to become his wife. Hugo's gentle squeeze on her elbow snapped her out of the grip of memories. "Belle, you're next," he whispered, and Isabella nodded. Taking a deep breath, she heard her name amidst applause, stepped onto the low stage, and faced the sea of camera flashes. As Isabella composed herself, ready to begin her presentation, something disrupted her focus. Her heart pounded desperately, and her head spun. What was causing this sudden fluster? Scanning the audience once more, she locked eyes with someone familiar, intense brown eyes belonging to the dearest person in her life. Transported back 7 years, Isabella recalled the limousine's stop at the church, stepping out in her luxurious golden dress. Her sister adjusted her hair as they ascended the wide staircase. Her father blessed her, kissed her forehead, and the doors swung open. The hall, however, greeted her with confused and empty stares, devoid of smiles or joy. Descending the memory lane, Isabella remembered the funeral-like atmosphere, the distant cries, and the shock of learning Javier had gone missing. A week later, they discovered his bloated body in a lake. Isabella turned to designing dresses as a way to cope. Now, standing before 100 people, she felt the weight of her long-lost loved one's eyes on her. "Come on, Bill," Hugo whispered, urging her forward. Isabella took a deep breath, beginning her performance. Yet, despite her will, her gaze wandered. Among the audience, she spotted the man with the familiar eyes, part of a foreign delegation, his dark, wavy hair revealing a touch of gray. Caught in his gaze, the man stood up and headed for the exit. Panic surged through Isabella. Stumbling and swaying, she dropped the presentation sheet. A commotion ensued in the front row as Hugo rushed to the stage to assist. Isabella helplessly looked between him and the exiting man, fearing he would vanish before she could unravel the mystery of those familiar eyes. Hugo stepped onto the stage, his hand on Isabella's elbow. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Isabella nodded, her throat dry. "Can you continue the presentation?" Hugo inquired, but Isabella's attention was fixed on the man by the exit, intent on leaving. "Wait," Isabella shouted, rushing towards the exit. Ignoring Hugo's words, her pink hat fell to the floor, but she paid it no mind. The man reached the elevator, and Isabella followed, slipping inside just in time. I must seem crazy, but you look so much like someone dear to me. Someone who passed away 7 years ago, she explained, her voice barely audible. The man lifted his eyes, and Isabella's heart froze. It was Javier, or someone who looked exactly like him, his gaze filled with tenderness and love, tinged with guilt. "Bill, how I've missed you," the man whispered, embracing her tightly. Tears streaming down her face, Isabella clung to him. "Where have you been all this time? Why did you leave me?" she pleaded. "I'll tell you everything," Javier replied softly, running his hand through her hair. The elevator doors opened, and Javier led her to a waiting car around the corner. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, Javier behind the wheel, and they drove off. It felt surreal. Javier's hands on the wheel, the dark hair on his wrists. "I saw you in a dream on the plane," Isabella sighed, struggling to grasp the reality of the moment. "I saw you in a dream every day throughout all these years," Javier confessed quietly. Parking in a narrow alley, he turned to her. "Forgive me, Bill. I couldn't do otherwise," he said. As Isabella leaned forward, suspicion crept in, but Javier gently asked her not to interrupt. "I couldn't put you in danger, Bill, so I staged my own death," he confessed, causing Isabella to burst into tears. "How could you, Javier? How could you?" she asked. "I almost died of grief when I found out you had drowned. I almost went crazy. And all these years, why did you leave me for so long? Why didn't you get in touch? It would have been enough just to hear from you," Isabella questioned, her emotions pouring out. "All this time, I had to hide. You can't imagine how dangerous they are, Bill. Yes, I was afraid for myself, but most of all for you," Javier explained, his eyes reflecting the weight of his hidden struggles. "I called you every evening." Isabella was thunderstruck. "So it was you," she sighed, her heart flooding with mixed emotions. Javier gently stroked her cheek, his touch a balm to her soul. "I thought about you every minute of every hour of every day of mine. I missed you so much, my love." Isabella nestled against him, her voice filled with longing. "Me too. But why didn't you call yesterday?" she asked, puzzled by his absence. "I was on a plane," Javier simply replied, his eyes filled with warmth. "And I knew that tomorrow I would finally see you." Isabella moved away slightly, her gaze searching his eyes for answers. "But why did you leave all these years? I've been following your success. When I found out you were going to participate in the biggest business conference, I suggested to my company to become your investor. I really wanted your dream to come true. When you stepped onto the stage in your enchanting outfit, I almost went crazy with the desire to touch you, but I couldn't approach. I didn't want to ruin everything by disrupting your presentation. I never thought you would notice me in the audience. I was afraid of breaking your life again. You've come so far, become famous nationwide. There was no room for me in your life." Isabella shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "Career could never replace what I've lost. You've always been everything to me." "Oh, Belle," Javier uttered, salty drops rolling down his face, revealing the depth of his emotions. Isabella held him close, feeling his vulnerability, a familiar sensation stirring within her, a longing to care for him, to ease his burdens. "What will become of us now?" Isabella whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I don't know. I'm free from them now, but it's not certain. In this business, you can never be 100% sure. I'm afraid it's still not safe for me." Isabella squeezed his hand, her heart heavy with worry. "I don't care. Life without you doesn't make sense." Javier ran his hand thoughtfully through her hair, contemplating their future. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. Isabella nodded without hesitation. Javier sighed, pulling her closer, his touch reassuring and tender. Then he kissed her, a promise of a new beginning, and started the car, embarking on their journey together. From that moment on, they never parted ways.
2 days before my due date, my husband's ex sent him a frantic text about an emergency. He told me to handle things on my own and disappeared for a week. When he finally came back, he was stunned to find his mom at our house with some papers. Oh boy, I read it. I'm in a very complicated situation right now, and any advice would be greatly appreciated. My husband Jeremy, 35M, and I, 32F, have been together for 5 years, married for 2. We met through work, so I didn't know much about his past initially. Eventually, I learned that we both had only had one serious relationship post-college. My ex and I had dated for 4 years, 3 during college and 1 year after, but we broke up due to personal differences and lost touch. We had been broken up for almost 5 years when I met Jeremy. However, Jeremy was still in touch with his ex when we started dating and was actually pretty good friends with her. His ex, let's call her Valerie, was his high school sweetheart. They had been together since they were 16, right through college, and had been broken up for 5 years when he met me. He told me that they had parted ways because she wanted to advance her career with a job in Australia, and he didn't want a long-distance relationship. They tried to make it work for a few months, but eventually mutually agreed to part ways since it was for the best. They were part of the same circle, so they continued to stay in touch and remain friends. I was fine with it until I met his group of friends for the first time after almost 9 months of dating. All of them got together for dinner on New Year's Eve, and Jeremy decided to take me along to introduce me to his friends. Valerie was there as well, which surprised me since I hadn't been prepared to see her. Jeremy had only said nice things about her, so initially, I wasn't insecure. But as soon as I started interacting with her, I realized her energy was very different from what I had expected. Jeremy had made her sound warm and relaxed, but she wasn't like that at all. She made some really cutting remarks about me in front of everyone, and everyone just laughed it off because apparently that was her sense of humor. But I didn't like it one bit. Nobody seemed to get it because she disguised her comments as jokes, like how she remarked that I looked different in person than in pictures, and how she wasn't sure if I was Jeremy's type since he preferred tall blondes and I was neither. But she was, and everybody laughed since they thought she was just joking. She also made some remarks about how I was her successor, so she felt like she owed it to me to give me some training on how to keep Jeremy happy. These remarks were still somewhat harmless, and I was willing to look past them, thinking she might just have a very weird sense of humor. But then, while we were drinking, she toasted to the fact that Jeremy had finally moved on and how happy she was for him. I thought that was nice until she added that had it not been for her decision to move to Australia, I probably wouldn't even be there with them. Thankfully, nobody laughed because it was awkward, but she quickly started laughing at her own comment, forcing everyone to chuckle to move past it. It wasn't lost on me that she was still possessive about Jeremy. Once we got back home, I told him I didn't want her speaking to me again if he wanted to be with me. I told him I was uncomfortable with his friendship with her since she was clearly not over him and had been rude to me the entire evening. I had put up with her respectfully once, but I wasn't going to do it again. I was very clear about my boundaries because even in my earlier relationships, I had to deal with similar issues. Thankfully, Jeremy seemed to understand where I was coming from. He told me he also found her behavior strange and decided he would cut her out of his life because he didn't want her causing issues in our relationship. After that incident, I never heard him mention Valerie or speak to her again. He told me he had blocked her, so I was content with that explanation. I met his friends several times after that, and they never brought up Valerie with me, probably because Jeremy had told them I didn't like her. Things had been going smoothly until last week. I was pregnant, and last Sunday was my due date. It's Thursday now, and Jeremy left to attend to Valerie because she had some emergency and needed him by her side. He left 2 days before my due date and came back last night. We had a massive argument about it because I had assumed he had blocked Valerie and wasn't in touch with her. He told me he had indeed blocked her, but she had used a different number to contact him and was pretty desperate. Apparently, she had been diagnosed with stage 2 brain cancer and really needed someone to be there for her. I was furious with him. How could he leave me alone when I was so heavily pregnant? I understood that it was difficult for him to accept that someone he used to be close to might not make it, but it wasn't as if she was going to pass away immediately. He could have gone the next day after being there for me during the labor and seeing his child born, but as soon as he got the news, he had to leave immediately. I tried to explain how ridiculous it was for him to even consider leaving me in this condition, but he insisted he'd be back before I went into labor, saying due dates aren't accurate and I might still have another week. He told me to just deal with it until he returned, then left for the airport without even finishing our conversation. He knew I didn't have my family here. My parents lived in Ua, and I was completely relying on him. After he left for the airport, I tried calling him several times, but his phone was switched off. Desperate and upset, I called my mother-in-law, who had always been nice to me. Through tears, I explained the situation, and she came right over, trying to call him as well. But of course, his phone remained off. She comforted me and stayed with me all day because I was extremely upset and kept crying, with the pregnancy hormones amplifying my emotions. We couldn't reach Jeremy until the next day, and even then, he didn't answer our calls. He only sent us both a text saying he would be back soon, hopefully before the baby was born. He apologized and said he would accept any punishment I deemed fit when he returned. But for now, he had to be there for an old friend who had no family in Australia and whose parents couldn't fly out due to her father's illness. She was counting on him to help her process this news, and he just had to be there. His explanation did nothing to calm me and only made me angrier. He thought it was more important to be there for an old friend than for his pregnant wife. A cancer diagnosis is serious, but what could he do about it? Cure her instantly? No, he should have stayed with me. My mother-in-law agreed and asked me bluntly if I wanted to leave him. Without much thought, I said yes. She spoke to her lawyer and had him draw up divorce papers and an agreement to terminate Jeremy's parental rights. She told me that if he came back before the due date, I could decide whether to file for divorce or talk to him first. If he didn't make it back in time, it would be clear what I had to do. Having raised Jeremy as a single parent, she understood the struggle and was determined to ensure I wouldn't go through the same thing. She promised Jeremy would pay child support, unlike his father, who abandoned them. She stayed with me throughout the week, offering support. For the next few days, neither of us contacted Jeremy. On Monday, I went into labor. My mother-in-law tried calling Jeremy to let him know, but he didn't pick up. She decided not to text him because there was no point. Fortunately, my parents had flown in the day before, so they were there for me. Still, I felt Jeremy's absence acutely. I made up my mind that no matter what happened when he came back, I would never see him the same way again. 3 hours after giving birth, I filled out the paperwork for the divorce and told the lawyer to file it on my behalf. One of my friends had advised me that if I wanted to be happy and be a good mother to my child, I had to take care of myself first. I couldn't do that with a man who prioritized his obligations to Valerie over me. After our daughter was born, I didn't even call Jeremy. My mother-in-law, my parents, and I stayed at home together. My parents were supposed to leave tomorrow, so it would just be me and my mother-in-law. I told them all about my decision to leave him because he hadn't tried to contact me despite promising to be back before the due date. He had spent a week with Valerie instead. Last night, Jeremy came home late. I'd opened the door and he hugged me, but I shook him off and said I wanted nothing to do with him. Hearing the doorbell and the commotion, my mother-in-law walked into the room with the papers and threw them in his face. She demanded he leave immediately. She didn't care where he spent the night. She wanted him out of the house because I needed peace and quiet after giving birth. She also told him I had already filled out the divorce paperwork and needed him to complete the paperwork to terminate his parental rights. Jeremy was shocked and speechless for a few minutes. I left the room because I was still weak and needed to recover. Seeing him had weakened my resolve. Then I heard yelling and realized Jeremy was fighting with his mother. I stayed out of it, comforting my daughter. After a few minutes, Jeremy started calling my name, demanding to see his daughter, claiming I owed him that much. That infuriated me. I put my daughter in her crib and confronted him. I told him I owed him nothing. He had chosen not to be there for me during my pregnancy and the birth of our child, leaving me alone. I was lucky my mother-in-law was there for me, but I owed him nothing. I told him to leave and that we could discuss this later in the morning. He left with tears in his eyes, trying to talk to me one last time, but I told him to go. We were tired and went to sleep. This morning, he showed up again. I finally told him it was over. It had been over the moment he left to be with Valerie. There was nothing he could say to change my mind. My mother-in-law was in the room, but I told her I wanted to have this conversation with him myself. Jeremy started crying and begging. My mother-in-law had to leave the house with the baby so our daughter wouldn't hear him. He kept insisting he had only gone because Valerie begged him, claiming she was on her deathbed. He said he stayed because she was alone and needed comfort, and it was purely platonic. but I wasn't there, so I didn't know what had happened. I told him it didn't matter anymore and I wanted him to leave. Then he pleaded, saying even if I divorced him, it was too harsh to take away his chance of being a father. He wanted me to reconsider or he would fight for custody. He knew it was unlikely he would get custody since he hadn't been there for the birth, and we could use that against him. Plus, our newborn daughter needed me more than her father. He begged for one chance because, despite everything, he really wanted a family. Eventually, Jeremy did leave but asked me to think it over. Now, I'm not so sure what to do. This is a huge decision involving people's lives, so I want to be certain before moving forward. Am I the asshole for divorcing my husband and asking him to terminate his parental rights over our daughter because he skipped her birth to be with his ex, who claimed to be on her deathbed? Update: I've made up my mind and am going through with the divorce. I'm still contemplating whether I want full custody or not. Jeremy has shown up at the house every day to apologize and literally beg for forgiveness. It's getting harder to turn him away, but I know I have to. Thankfully, my mother-in-law has been incredibly supportive and is helping me take care of the baby. My parents had to fly back home, but my mother-in-law has moved in with me long-term to provide the help I need. I told her that even if I decide against giving Jeremy full or partial custody, she will always be welcome to visit her granddaughter. I asked my mother-in-law for her opinion on the custody situation, but she left the decision to me, confident that I'll make the right choice for both of us, just like I did with the divorce. I'm still struggling with this decision, and it hasn't gotten any easier because Jeremy keeps showing up. Every time he comes, I feel like taking him back and forgiving him, but I can't, not after everything I've been through. Valerie has always been a sore spot for me, and he ignored that even when I was pregnant with his baby. Honestly, I don't know if they have been in touch or if something was going on between them recently. I can't trust anything he says anymore. His apologies are always the same. He insists nothing happened. It was all platonic, and he was just taking care of her because she claimed to be on her deathbed. Every time, I have to tell him the same thing back. It doesn't matter anymore because I've made up my mind and am leaving him. It's sad, but that's just how it is. Update 2. A few days ago, I posted an update about deciding to go through with the divorce but being unsure about filing for full custody of my daughter. Now, I think I know what to do. For almost 5 days straight, Jeremy showed up daily to apologize and try to win me back. Then, he suddenly stopped. I found it strange but felt relieved, thinking I could finally think clearly. However, after he stopped coming, I started receiving texts from people telling me that what I was doing was incredibly wrong and immoral, and they never expected me to act like this. His friends began bombarding me with messages, not just his usual group but every single person who went to school or college with him. It felt like he set up a template for them to send, like a petition. They sent emails and messages trying to convince me to cancel the divorce. At first, I blocked people left and right, but then they started making fake accounts to send the same messages. There are only so many people you can block. Besides, I'm dealing with emotional trauma, processing everything, and trying to be there for my newborn daughter. This is the last thing I needed. If Jeremy really cared about me, he wouldn't be putting me through all of this at such a delicate stage of my life. It's obvious he only cares about himself. I don't think I have to worry about my daughter's custody anymore. I'm going to file for full custody, and that's final. He still has the papers and can sign his rights away if he chooses. I've spoken to my lawyer, and this is happening. The messages I've been receiving are hurtful, and I know for a fact that he has written the template and instructed his friends to send it to me. It reflects his beliefs more than anything else. If this is how he views me, we don't need to be together at all. The messages included a line saying, "We never expected you to be the kind of person who would use their child as a pawn to punish their partner and play mind games like this." Is he for real? Does he seriously think I'm using our daughter to punish him for what he did? He clearly doesn't understand how marriages or children work. That line hurt me deeply and solidified my decision. When I showed the messages to my mother-in-law, she was very upset and wanted to contact him and tell him off. I asked her not to because it wasn't worth it. Confronting him would only lead to him denying any involvement, even though it's clear all his friends are sending the same type of messages. I don't understand why he involved his friends in this. It's not like I'm going to read their messages and instantly stop what I'm doing. Their opinions don't matter to me because they aren't my friends. I've never been close to any of them, so they can think whatever they want about me. I don't care. I guess he thought if enough people started texting me, I'd give in to the pressure. But he doesn't know me at all. I'm not the kind of person who bends to pressure. I did change my mind when he showed up every day begging for forgiveness. I knew letting him back into my life would not be good for any of us, especially our daughter. I might have felt terrible about it, but I still went through with it because I don't bend easily. After being with me for so long, he should have an idea of what kind of person I am. But it's clear he doesn't. It's becoming clearer every day that I'm doing the right thing by leaving him. Even if every single person he knows starts texting me, I will change my mind. In fact, this situation has only strengthened my resolve. As long as the people I love are on my side, I don't have to worry about any of this. Update 3. The legal proceedings for the divorce and the custody agreement will commence in a couple of days. Jeremy has decided not to contest the divorce but is demanding at least partial custody of our daughter. We're going to see how that works out. I'm open to the idea because I'm not inherently evil, but I don't want to implement shared custody until our daughter is at least a couple of years old. That's what we're going to negotiate, and I'm very happy I've made this decision for myself. Now that it's finally happening and hitting me how real all of this is, I thought I would be scared, but I've never felt more sure of anything in my life. I think some of this confidence might be because of a message I received from Valerie yesterday. She told me that she really didn't want to be a homewrecker but needed somebody by her side since her parents wouldn't be there for her. Jeremy was the only person she could think of. She also mentioned that over the past couple of years she had tried to contact him several times and he had always turned her down, saying I wouldn't approve of it. But she knew that her oldest friend in the world would always be there for her, especially if she was sick, which is why she contacted him. She apologized for the trouble this had stirred up in my marriage, but thought I should let him retain his individuality instead of being so controlling. So, I was right that he hadn't blocked her at all, and they had stayed in touch, maybe not in the way I thought, but they did at least speak to each other. The worst part was that she also told me they had shared a moment when they were together and ended up kissing for a couple of minutes. But after that, Jeremy had drawn away from her, saying he couldn't do this, especially while his wife was with his child. She told me that he had not let the kiss last more than a couple of minutes, and that was how loyal he was to me, as if that was supposed to make a difference. It was ridiculous, but yes, I was right about everything. Now, getting the divorce and custody on my terms should be a cakewalk. I've spoken to my lawyer, and we've tweaked our petition to demand slightly more of everything because I feel I deserve it since I've been cheated on. I'm feeling very confident about what I'm doing and know that things are going to work out.
Hello, I'm Sophia, 34 years old, and recently I found some quiet moments to reflect. I thought it might be time to share the story of how I stood up to my overbearing ex-husband, Charles. Let's start at the beginning. Charles and I met shortly after I graduated from college, at a party hosted by a mutual friend. We hit it off right away, and what followed was an easy, natural connection that turned into a relationship. After 4 blissful years, we decided to get married, sure of the bond we shared. For a long time, my relationship with Charles was a comfort. He was attentive and made me feel like my happiness came first. However, I overlooked the financial dynamics in our marriage. While Charles worked a regular job, his income was significantly lower than mine. Despite that, he bought a house, taking on a hefty mortgage and numerous bills. Wanting to support him, I agreed to take on the financial burden. Everything changed when I became pregnant about a year into our marriage. Though the pregnancy was unplanned, we were excited and welcomed the news. 8 months later, our daughter Julie was born, but after Julie's arrival, Charles's attitude shifted. He insisted I quit my job to care for her, and though I hesitated, I eventually agreed, thinking it would be best for her early years. At first, I was overjoyed bonding with Julie, but it didn't take long before Charles's expectations at home became unreasonable. He demanded a spotless house and timely meals, ignoring the enormous effort it took to care for a newborn. No matter how hard I tried to meet these demands, I couldn't keep up, and Charles's temper grew more volatile. I defended myself, explaining the challenges of caring for a baby, especially since Charles never helped with nighttime feedings, leaving me to handle it alone while he slept. After enduring his outbursts for over a year, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to reclaim my voice and space in our marriage. We faced significant financial strain during that first year, but thankfully I had savings to rely on. Still, draining my savings wasn't a long-term solution. I realized I needed to contribute more actively to our financial stability, so one evening after Charles came home from work, I decided to have a serious conversation. I approached him carefully, saying, "I've been thinking, and there's something important I need to discuss. Can we talk?" Charles, exhausted from his day, agreed, though he asked me to keep it brief. I shared that I wanted to return to work, emphasizing that it had been a year since Julie was born and it felt like the right time for me to contribute financially again. Charles didn't take my suggestion well. He was upset and claimed it wasn't my place to make such decisions without consulting him. He even expressed concern about how my working might make him look to others, fearing it would signal he couldn't provide for our family. I couldn't understand why he cared so much about what others thought instead of focusing on what was best for our family. Why does it matter what others think? Shouldn't we focus on what's best for us and ensuring Julie has everything she needs? I argued, but Charles insisted we wait longer, claiming it was for our best interests. However, it was clear it was more about his ego and how he wanted to be perceived. Frustrated, I stood firm in asserting my right to make decisions about my career and our family's future. I pointed out that my thoughts and desires mattered too. The conversation escalated when Charles hinted he might leave if things didn't go his way, accusing me of not caring about his feelings. I was taken aback. Was he threatening to leave over this? It was clear that this wasn't just about me going back to work, it was about his inability to see beyond his ego and consider what was best for our family. That moment marked a turning point for me. I realized I needed to assert my independence and prioritize our needs over his outdated notions of pride. I knew I had to take drastic steps. If Charles thought threatening to leave was the way to get my attention, I had to show him that I cared about his feelings, but that his emotions could not always come first. When you start valuing my feelings, I'll reciprocate, I told him firmly. His response was extreme, and I was left in shock. After our heated exchange, Charles simply walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. It was as if the conversation never happened. In the following days, I seethed with anger, but it also became clear to me that Charles was hardly around. He didn't seem interested in my daily life, and it became apparent he was disconnected from everything I was doing. That's when I decided to revisit an old hobby, embroidery. I began turning it into a small side business. Charles occasionally noticed me working on it but never asked about it. Gradually, my resentment towards him lessened, but the reality that our marriage was falling apart became undeniable. I was determined that Julie would never go through the same painful aftermath of a divorce that I had, so I kept pushing forward, undeterred. For the next 4 years, Charles's involvement with Julie improved, though only slightly. He'd ask about her now, though he rarely engaged directly, which was frustrating, but still, it was a step up from his previous neglect. Financially, we were in a better place, but Charles never once questioned where the extra money was coming from. That bothered me. How could he not wonder? Despite that, I saved most of what I earned and used the rest to cover our expenses. I was prepared to continue in this way until Julie turned 19, thinking that was the only option. Then one evening, Charles came home late. As usual, I asked about his day and mentioned that maybe he should spend more time with Julie to make up for his absences. His response was dismissive and disheartening. He claimed he couldn't, citing a big project at work. The pattern of excuses and detachment continued, and I realized it was time for me to seriously reevaluate our future together. Charles suggested hosting a dinner to motivate his colleagues to finish a project. Curious, I asked if it would be just his colleagues or if their families would be included. He told me it would be an adults-only gathering, inviting only their wives. I expressed concern about Julie and whether we needed a babysitter. Charles, however, dismissed it, saying we could just put her to bed early. When I asked if I should dress up for the dinner, Charles immediately said no. He insisted he wanted it to be a casual event, to avoid seeming pretentious. I agreed, though I was already feeling uneasy. The next day, I went shopping to pick up ingredients for the dinner. As the evening approached, I felt a ball of nerves in my stomach, trying to present our marriage in the best light. To my surprise, every single guest, including Charles, arrived dressed in elegant attire. Charles had told me not to dress up, but I now realized it was a deliberate oversight, leaving me feeling underdressed and embarrassed. The evening progressed without incident, until a moment occurred that I will never forget. While serving dinner, one of Charles's colleagues asked me who I was. With unsettling ease, Charles introduced me as Julie's nanny. His words struck me like a cold shock, stirring a rage inside me that I had never felt before. I wanted to correct him immediately, but instead, I retreated, overwhelmed by humiliation and betrayal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, and I spent it isolated, overhearing the laughter and chatter of the guests, all of which deepened my sense of indignation and hurt. After the guests left, Charles came into our bedroom as though nothing had happened, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. His lie not only insulted me, but it also made me question the very foundation of our relationship. I waited for him to address what had happened, but he acted as though everything was normal, going through his usual routine. It wasn't until he was comfortably in bed that he noticed my silence and asked if I was upset with him. His obliviousness was astonishing. "Are you really asking me that, after what you said tonight?" I challenged. He seemed genuinely confused, asking what he could have possibly said to upset me. When I confronted him about calling me Julie's nanny, his response was dismissive, as if it was no big deal. I should have understood why Charles did it, but I couldn't bring myself to. I demanded an explanation, desperate to make sense of his actions. His justification was nothing short of shocking. He admitted that he found it embarrassing to acknowledge I was a stay-at-home mom. He feared it made us look outdated and dependent, especially when the wives of his colleagues were all employed. He argued that my staying at home made us seem less progressive, especially in the eyes of his friends, who valued the independence and careers of their partners. I was stunned. How could my contribution to our family, my managing everything at home, be seen as weakness or dependency? I reminded him that I was the one handling everything, cooking, cleaning, taking care of Julie, and that had nothing to do with being dependent on him. But Charles insisted that my lack of income was a source of embarrassment for him. His words stung, deeply unfair and contradictory. After all, it was his idea for me to stay at home in the first place. What followed was a heated argument about values and appearances. Charles asked me to simply go along with his fabricated narrative, for the sake of his reputation. His dismissal of my feelings, and his request for me to support his lie, was the last straw. I was hurt, frustrated, and furious, but I agreed to play along, though I warned him he might regret asking me to do so. I grabbed an extra pillow and retreated to Julie's room, seeking refuge from Charles's demeaning perspective on our family dynamic. That night, I found little comfort other than the quiet release of tears as I processed the hurt he had inflicted. His words echoed in my mind, deepening the wound to my self-esteem. It became painfully clear, I couldn't let this cycle of disrespect continue. Not just for my sake, but for Julie's, too. I couldn't allow her to grow up thinking that such behavior was acceptable in any relationship. The next morning, after dropping Julie off at school, I walked into a divorce lawyer's office. It felt surreal, but strangely, I also felt a sense of relief at the thought of a future free from Charles's demeaning attitude. I gathered all the necessary financial documents, including records of my inheritances and investments, and waited for the divorce papers to be prepared. Once everything was in order, I devised a plan to confront Charles publicly. I arranged a meeting, pretending it was for business purposes, and invited him and his colleagues, none of whom knew the true agenda. When the meeting began, Charles's confusion was evident. I seized the opportunity to set the record straight, addressing the group and exposing the lie he had told about me being just Julie's nanny. Charles tried to dismiss the situation, but my resolve only grew stronger. I revealed a personal account he wasn't aware of, shocking everyone, including him, by displaying its substantial balance. This dramatic revelation served two purposes. It corrected his false narrative and publicly denounced his shallow, disrespectful behavior toward me. Charles's weak attempts to justify himself fell flat. His admission that he lied out of panic did nothing to salvage his dignity. I turned his own words against him, pointing out the irony of his claim that I was financially dependent on him. The unfolding drama made it clear. By exposing his hypocrisy, I not only reclaimed my dignity, but also highlighted the fundamental importance of respect and truth in any relationship. This public confrontation was a decisive step in ending a marriage that had been tainted by superficial judgments and disrespect. In that moment, I laid bare the truth to everyone present. Charles had reduced my role to that of a nanny in front of his colleagues to avoid the embarrassment of admitting that I, his wife, was the one managing the household while he focused solely on his career. He had been comfortable boasting about his financial contribution, as though it were the only one that mattered. My declaration that he had turned me into a nanny in his colleagues' eyes was the final blow. Without waiting for a private discussion, the truth was out, and so was the marriage. I handed Charles the divorce papers then and there. "Julie and I will be leaving this house by this weekend," I declared, making it clear there was no turning back. His obsession with having a wife he could boast about, rather than a partner, had led us to this point. His actions had humiliated me beyond repair, and no amount of explanation or pleading could change my mind now. Read myself for the inevitable argument. I refused to let him have any power over me anymore. I thanked his colleagues for their time and left the room, determined not to hear any more of his excuses. I rushed to pick up Julie, wanting to find refuge before the confrontation I knew was coming. Once home, I double-checked that everything important was packed and prepared myself for the inevitable argument. I refused to let him have any power over me anymore. True to form, Charles arrived home shortly after, seething with anger. He demanded to know why I had made such a public statement. I remained calm, explaining that it was a message to him and to everyone else about the importance of respect in a relationship, something he had long forgotten. He was more concerned about his tarnished reputation than the well-being of our family. Even now, with our marriage ending, his priorities remained twisted, focused solely on how others viewed him. I pointed out the irony of his concern for his image when he had been living a lie. Despite not working outside the home, I had contributed financially to our household, something he had never questioned or appreciated. His indifference to anything but his social standing was the final confirmation that we were no longer compatible. I told him that he and his reputation could face the future without us. My priority was creating a healthy environment for Julie and myself, far removed from the toxic dynamics that had defined our marriage. As I stood firm, the realization set in that our journey together had come to an end. A new chapter awaited Julie and me, one grounded in respect, truth, and freedom. With everything packed and ready, I was prepared to leave. Charles's threat to fight for custody in court didn't faze me. I calmly reminded him that I had accumulated 4 years of documentation highlighting his absence as a parent. Despite his attempts to make me out to be the villain, I knew the truth: Julie would stay with me. Charles accused me of trying to ruin his life over a single comment, but I made it clear that his remark was merely the tipping point. His continuous mistreatment and disregard for me had been ongoing, and the comment at dinner was just the latest example of how little he valued me. When he lashed out, calling me insane and questioning my mental state, I saw it for what it was: his inability to face the truth. I told him this was an opportunity for self-reflection, hoping he might finally understand the depth of his actions. I left him with one final remark: enduring his insults for years made his current humiliation feel insignificant. I gathered Julie and prepared to leave. As we drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The end of our family wasn't something I had ever wanted, but I knew it was necessary. I wasn't to blame for how things had turned out, but the weight of the situation still sat heavily on my heart. Julie, however, seemed largely unaffected. She had rarely interacted with Charles due to his frequent absences, so the change didn't disrupt her as much as I had feared. In fact, her excitement about our fresh start was infectious. We settled into a new condo I had purchased, and Julie's joy over her new room brought a warmth I hadn't felt in years. This move wasn't just about a new home, it was the beginning of a new life, free from the shadow of a controlling spouse. Securing a new job came easier than I expected, largely due to the unexpected support I received from some of Charles's former colleagues. After the public incident, they reached out with offers of help, enabling me to land interviews with prestigious companies. Meanwhile, Charles faced professional isolation, and his colleagues distanced themselves, leading to his eventual resignation from his stagnating career. The divorce proceedings were intense, with Charles fighting for custody. But armed with undeniable evidence of his lack of involvement and Julie's wish to stay with me, the court's decision was straightforward. I chose not to pursue any of Charles's assets or wealth. I wanted nothing more than to sever our ties completely and start fresh on my own terms. A year has passed since those tumultuous days, and looking back, I occasionally reflect on everything that transpired. The memory of Charles's public reckoning still brings a sense of triumph and a smile to my face, reaffirming my decision to pursue a happier, more fulfilling life, for Julie and for myself.